She slapped his hand away. Right there, in front of everyone. Charles Montgomery had reached out and knocked the old man's bidding card to the floor, casual. Deliberate, the way a man knocks over a glass just to watch someone else clean it up. And Clara Bennett, a nobody, a librarian's daughter with holes in her boots, and 2 months of unpaid rent, grabbed Montgomery's wrist before he could pull it back. The entire auction hall stopped breathing. "Pick it up," she said. Not a request. Montgomery stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had, she was shaking, but her grip didn't loosen. "Pick it up. If this story moves something in you, subscribe. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far one woman's courage can travel." The morning started the way bad days always do in small towns. Quietly, no warning, no thunder. Just an ordinary Thursday in Harlow Creek. 1,887 dry summer air, dust on Main Street, and Clara Bennett walking to the county grain hall in her dark blue dress with the mended collar, holding $31 in a small envelope inside her coat pocket. $31. Every cent she had in the world. She wasn't there to spend it all. She was there for a writing desk walnut, 2 small drawers, going up at the Henderson estate auction for a price she'd rehearsed in her head 100 times on the walkover. 25. She would go to 25 and not a cent more. The collar of her dress had been mended 3 times. She'd done it herself, each time with slightly different thread, because she bought whatever was cheapest. If you looked closely, you could see all 3 repairs, 3 thin lines of stubbornness sewn into the fabric. She held her head like the collar was silk. That was Clara Bennett. 26 years old, father dead 2 winters ago. 4 years as assistant librarian at the Harlow Creek Public Library. A job that paid just enough to keep her in the small second-floor room at Mrs. Greer's boarding house, just enough to eat, just enough to stay on the right side of the line. She could feel herself standing near every single day. She walked into the grain hall, found a space near the back wall. And she waited. She smelled Montgomery before she saw him. Not literally, but there was a shift in the room when he walked in, the way air shifts before a storm. The way a crowd unconsciously reorganizes itself around a man who has never once in his life been told no by anyone who couldn't afford the consequences. Charles Montgomery, 38, heir to the Montgomery Mercantile Empire. Owner of 3 buildings on Main Street, 2 in the next county. And a manner that suggested he considered the rest of the world a minor inconvenience arranged for his occasional amusement. He came in with 2 associates and a woman in a pale yellow dress that probably cost more than Clara made in 4 months. He was already laughing at something when he entered. That particular laugh, slightly too loud, angled outward. Meant to announce his presence to the room before his presence did it for him. Clara watched him settle near the front. She turned back to the auctioneer. The auction ran its course: livestock, copper pots, a mahogany wardrobe that went to the banker's wife. Clara waited. She was good at waiting. When you don't have money, patience stops being a virtue and becomes a survival skill. Then the door opened at the wrong moment between bids. In a sliver of silence, and Theodore Whitaker walked in. He was old, perhaps 70-something, though he carried it the way some men do. Like age is something that happened to his body, but not to the thing behind his eyes. Brown coat worn thin at the elbows, simple wooden cane. The handle smooth from years of use. White hair neatly combed. Shoes clean if old. He found a space near the edge of the crowd without drawing attention and stood quietly, watching the auctioneer with patient, steady eyes. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away. 20 minutes later, the writing desk came up. "Beautiful piece," the auctioneer called out. "Dark walnut, Henderson family estate. Do I have 20? Clara raised her hand. 20. 22, came a voice from across the room. Clara, 24. The other voice. Firm, she hesitated. 25 was her ceiling. She'd promised herself. She lowered her hand. Then Theodore Whitaker raised his. 25 and 50 cents, he said, quiet, clear. The auctioneer nodded, opened his mouth, and Charles Montgomery turned around. He looked at the old man the way a cat looks at something, before deciding whether it's worth the effort. 25 and 50 cents, Montgomery repeated. Slowly, smiling, he let the silence sit for a beat long enough for people to realize they were supposed to find this amusing. Sir, he gestured at Theodore's coat with a loose wave of his hand. I say this as a kindness. That coat you're wearing wouldn't fetch $3 at the ragman's. This desk belongs in a proper home. He paused. Let his eyes travel over the old man deliberately. Top to bottom, not in well, wherever it is you sleep. Laughter moved through the room like a wave. Clara felt it. She felt the people around her, merchants. Farmers, wealthy wives make their small individual decisions. Not cruelty, most of them. Just the easier thing, the more comfortable thing. The thing that kept you on the right side of Charles Montgomery on a Thursday afternoon. Theodore didn't flinch. He didn't flush with humiliation. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. That specific, private tiredness of a man who had stopped expecting anything better from strangers in public rooms. A man who had learned somewhere along the way to simply endure. The auctioneer shuffled his papers, not looking up. The particular exhaustion of a man who had watched scenes like this before and had made his peace with watching them again. Montgomery reached over casual, almost lazy, and flicked Theodore's bidding card out of his hand. It spun to the floor. The room laughed harder, and Clara Bennett stopped thinking. She moved through the crowd before she'd made a decision. People parted, not out of respect, out of surprise. A woman walking with that kind of purpose through a crowd produces a small, involuntary gap. She stopped when her hand closed around Montgomery's wrist. The laughter died. The room went so quiet she could hear the dust. Montgomery looked down at her hand on his wrist with an expression she would remember for a long time, not anger. Not yet. Pure, uncomprehending shock. The shock of a man who has never in his adult life been physically stopped by another human being. And certainly not by a woman in a mended collar. Let go, he said. Very quietly. The kind of quiet that was its own threat. Pick it up, Clara said. I bidding card. Her voice didn't shake. She was shaking everywhere else. She could feel it in her legs, in her jaw, but her voice came out flat and level and certain. Pick it up. Montgomery stared at her. The room stared at her. Theodore Whitaker stared at her. Miss Montgomery said, with dangerous softness, you are making a very significant mistake. I've made mistakes before, Clara said. Pick up the card. A beat. 2 beats, 3. Montgomery pulled his wrist free. She let him and looked down at the card on the floor. And looked back at Clara, and something moved behind his eyes. A calculation. A decision being made and stored for later. He looked at the room. He smiled. He bent slowly, deliberately, and picked up the card and held it out to Theodore with a small, mock courteous bow. My apologies, he said pleasantly. I seem to have been clumsy. Nobody laughed this time. He straightened and looked at Clara with that same pleasant smile, and she understood. In her stomach, before her mind caught up, that she had just done something irreversible. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she looked at the auctioneer. I believe there was a bid on the table, she said. The auctioneer cleared his throat. 25 and 50 cents. Do I hear more? Going twice. He brought down the gavel. Sold. The auction continued as if nothing had happened. Clara walked back to her space at the wall. Her legs were not entirely reliable. She pressed her back against the plaster and breathed and told herself, You're standing. Marta Elkins materialized at her elbow. Marta ran the post office and had known Clara since childhood and had the particular quality of appearing wherever information was being generated. Lord above, Marta breathed, low and close to Clara's ear. Girl, do you have any idea I know what I did, Clara said. He's going to come for you. He was going to come for me the moment I opened my mouth. The wrist didn't change the math. Marta was quiet for a moment. Then your daddy would have done the same thing. Clara looked at the auctioneer. At the mahogany wardrobe being delivered to the banker's wife. At the ordinary machinery of a Thursday afternoon resuming around her. No, she said quietly, he'd have done it faster. When the auction ended, Clara was moving toward the exit when a voice caught her. Miss, she turned. Theodore Whitaker stood a few feet back. He'd reclaimed the bidding card and was holding it in one hand, his cane in the other. Up close, his face held something she hadn't expected, not gratitude exactly. More like recognition. The look of someone who has seen a thing and understood it fully. I wanted to thank you, he said. No, he agreed. I want to. She looked at him, at the coat, at the steady, unhurried eyes. She asked. I've been all right for a good many years. A small, dry smile. I suspect I'll survive a bit of laughter. You shouldn't have to survive it. He looked at her for a moment. No, you're right about that. He tilted his head slightly. May I ask your name? Theodore Whitaker. He inclined his head, old-fashioned. Deliberate. May I ask what brought you here today? Miss Bennet? You didn't look like you came for entertainment. The writing desk, she said. A beat. Ah, he said, you lost the bid. I lost the bid before you came into it, she said precisely. My limit was 25. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. You are very exact, he said. I'm a librarian. Precision is an occupational habit, was Marta Elkins said loudly from somewhere to their left, passing with her basket, not even slowing down. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Theodore raised an eyebrow. I work at the public library, Clara said. Though she heard, even as she said it, how fragile that present tense already sounded. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that by 9 o'clock the next morning, it would already be past tense. Harold Fitch did not offer her a seat. That was the first thing she noticed when she walked into his office, the small room behind the reference shelves that smelled of pipe, tobacco, and avoidance, and found him standing behind his desk, with his hands folded and his face arranged into the specific expression of a man delivering news he wishes someone else were delivering. I'll be brief, he said. Please, Clara said. There's been a complaint about your conduct at the county auction. I attended the county auction. I placed a bid and I made a comment. You physically restrained Charles Montgomery. I took hold of his wrist briefly to prevent him from Clara. His voice dropped into the particular register of men who think that saying your first name softly constitutes compassion. Mr. Montgomery funds this library's winter coal delivery. He paid for the new reading table in the children's section. He has made it known that your continued presence here is incompatible with his continued what? Clara said. Generosity? Is that the word we're using? Fitch looked at his desk. Your position is no longer available, he said. The words landed in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. She stood very still. She breathed. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, the way her father had taught her. The way she'd counted in the doctor's office the morning he died. The way she'd counted on the walk home afterward through February sleet. So, she said, when she had finished counting, I am being dismissed because I prevented a wealthy man from physically humiliating an elderly stranger. And you are the one who is sorry. Fitch said nothing. How convenient for you, Clara said. That's sorry doesn't cost anything. She turned. She walked out of his office, past the reference shelves, past the children's reading table with the good surface that Charles Montgomery had paid for, past the warped shelves she had spent 4 years cataloging and mending and keeping in order. She took one thing from her desk, a small book of poetry her father had given her. She put it in her coat pocket. She walked out the front door. She stood on the library steps in the morning sun. And she breathed, and she did not cry. She would not cry on a public street. She had decided that about herself the morning her father died. She had walked home alone in February with ice on her eyelashes and grief like a fist around her throat. And she had not come apart in front of strangers. She was not going to start today because of Charles Montgomery. She breathed. All right, she said to herself. All right. Word moved through Harlow Creek the way it always did, fast, and in several directions at once. By afternoon, there were 3 versions of the story. In the first, Clara Bennett had assaulted a respected businessman. In the second, she had made a spectacle of herself defending some vagrant nobody knew. In the third, the version carried by people who had actually been in the room, a woman, with nothing, had grabbed the most powerful man in town and told him to pick up what he'd knocked down. And he had, and the room had been so quiet you could hear the summer heat. Depending on who was telling it, either the bravest thing or the stupidest thing anyone had done in Harlow Creek in years. Marta Elkins, who told only the third version, added to each recounting. She didn't shake. I was watching her hands the whole time. She did not shake once. Clara, who heard this secondhand, sat at her small kitchen table and thought, I was shaking the entire time. I just didn't let it reach my hands. Mrs. Greer brought cold chicken and biscuits that evening without being asked. She set the plate down, patted Clara's shoulder once firmly. Briefly, the way a woman pats someone she respects too much to pity, and said, You'll find something else. I do, Clara agreed. Just sometimes your mouth moves faster than your circumstances can handle. Yes. Clara looked at the plate. I come by it honestly. My father was the same way. He was Mrs. Greer said. And this town misses him, and it'll miss you too. If you let this town drive you out. She moved toward the door. Stopped. Didn't turn around. Don't let it drive you out. Then she left. Clara sat alone in the last of the evening light and ate and thought and counted what she had. Savings enough for the back rent, and perhaps 6 weeks after. If she was careful. Skills she could write, organize, teach, catalog, read in 3 languages. The 3 languages were useless in Harlow Creek, where the wealthy families who cared about French literature already had private tutors. And the families who might have benefited from a teacher who could read in 3 languages couldn't afford to pay for one. She was not afraid. She was precise about that distinction. She had been afraid before, real physical cold afraid, and this was not that. This was the feeling of standing very close to a line and knowing the line was real. And knowing she had only herself between where she was and where she didn't want to go. She sat at the table and she did not collapse. That counted for something. She just didn't know yet how much. Montgomery came himself on the 3rd day. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected rumors, whispers. Doors closing all the indirect machinery a man like Montgomery could operate without ever leaving his parlor. She had not expected him to come to Mrs. Greer's boarding house on a Saturday morning and knock on the front door and ask to speak with her. Mrs. Greer came upstairs with her mouth in a thin line and said, Charles Montgomery is in my parlor. Clara set down the letter she'd been writing application to the county school board. 3rd draft, and folded it carefully and put it in the desk drawer. Tell him I'll be down in 2 minutes, she said. She took 3. Montgomery was standing when she came in. He hadn't sat. It was a deliberate choice, she understood that immediately. Standing gave him height, command, the particular authority of a man who had not come to be comfortable. He looked at her with the same pleasant expression he'd worn at the auction, the one that sat over whatever was actually happening in his eyes, like a coat over a weapon. Miss Bennett, he said. Montgomery. She did not offer her hand. She did not sit. She stood in the doorway and looked at him steadily. A beat. I'll be direct, he said. Please, she said. I prefer it. What happened at the auction was unfortunate. He moved to the center of the room slowly. Hands clasped behind his back. I am not a man who holds grudges. I want you to know that. That is reassuring, Clara said. I am, however, a man who values order, propriety. The understanding that in a community like this one, certain relationships need to be maintained. He stopped. Looked at her. You made a scene. You put your hands on me in public. You cost me something. What did I cost you? Clara asked. He blinked. Just slightly. I beg your pardon? You said I cost you something. I'm curious what? You still have your money, your buildings. Your reputation which, from what I can tell, remains entirely intact. What did I cost you, Mr. Montgomery? The pleasant expression remained. But something underneath it shifted. You cost me face, he said. Very quietly. In front of people who watched you humiliate an old man and laughed along, Clara said. Yes. I imagine that must be uncomfortable. Montgomery looked at her for a long moment. I came here, he said, because I thought perhaps you were young and impulsive and didn't fully understand the nature of what you'd done. I came to offer you. He paused, almost imperceptibly. The pause of a man recalibrating. Advice. That an apology, quietly made, might go a considerable way toward, Clara said. He stopped. No, she said again clearly, as if she were reading from a page. I will not apologize for preventing you from humiliating a man who had done nothing to you. I will not apologize for telling the truth in front of witnesses. And I will not apologize because it would make your life more comfortable. She looked at him evenly. If you have something else to say to me, I'm listening. But that particular conversation is finished. Montgomery stared at her. For the first time since she'd grabbed his wrist, something moved across his face that was not calculation or performance. It was cold. You are, he said, very quiet, making a very serious error in judgment. Miss Bennet. It wouldn't be my first, she said. Good morning, Mr. Montgomery. She held the doorway. He left. She listened to his footsteps on the porch steps. Then on the walk, then silence. Then she went back upstairs and sat at her small table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed until her hands stopped trembling. All right, she said, all right. Theodore Whitaker knocked on her door 4 days later. She opened it, and he was standing on the step in his brown coat with his cane, and the same patient, unhurried expression, and he said, I owe you an apology. You don't, she said. I heard about your position, he said, and I heard about Montgomery's visit. Clara went still. How small town, he said simply. May I come in? I have only about an hour's worth of conversation in me today. But I'd prefer to have it sitting down. She stepped back and let him in. She made tea. They sat at the small table. The morning light came through the window and lay across the surface between them. You shouldn't feel responsible, she said. I feel responsible because I contributed to the circumstances that led to your dismissal, Theodore said. He wrapped his old hands around the cup. A different man would have walked away from that auction when Montgomery began speaking. I chose to stand my ground. You had every right to stand your ground. Rights and consequences are not the same thing. He looked at her. I have learned that at considerable cost over the years. Clara studied him across the table. She had been wondering about him since the auction, not intrusively, but with the particular sustained attention she gave to things that didn't quite add up. He was clearly educated. He chose words with precision. His manners were not the manners of a poor man. They were the manners of a man who had chosen to live simply, which was a different thing entirely, and a choice you could only make if you'd once had the alternative. May I ask you something, she said. You may ask anything. I reserve the right not to answer. How long have you been in Harlow Creek? 3 months, and before that. He looked at her with those steady, complicated eyes. Many places, he said. I've been moving for some years. Toward something or away from something. The corner of his mouth moved. You ask the question as if they're different directions, aren't they? At my age, he said. They become the same road. He looked at his tea. I lost my wife 11 years ago. After that, staying in one place felt incorrect. Like wearing someone else's coat. He paused. Does that make sense to you? Yes, Clara said. Without hesitating. My father died 2 winters ago, she said. This town was his school, his street, his grave. I stayed because leaving felt like abandonment, but staying means something different than it used to. She looked at her hands around the cup. Most mornings it means endurance. Most mornings it does, Theodore agreed quietly. And on the others? She thought about it honestly. On the others, she said it means something closer to purpose. If I can find a way to hold on to that longer than 20 minutes at a time, I think I'll be all right. Theodore looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Miss Bennet, may I ask what it was? At the auction specifically, in that moment that made you move. Not the general principle, the specific thing. Clara looked at her tea. Your face, she said. He waited. You weren't humiliated, she said. You were accustomed to it. There's a difference. Humiliation implies surprise. What I saw in your face was the complete absence of surprise. She met his eyes. That was worse than anything, Montgomery said. The fact that you'd learned to expect it. The fact that you stood there and absorbed it like a man who'd decided long ago that this was simply the cost of existing in public. She paused. Nobody should arrive at that conclusion. Not for any reason. And certainly not because of a man like Charles Montgomery. Theodore was quiet for a long time. The clock on the mantel marked the seconds. Clara Bennet, he said finally. And his voice had changed slightly quieter, more deliberate. As if he were being careful with it. In 72 years. I have been thanked for many things. Money mostly. Connections. Introductions. Favorable decisions made in the right rooms. He looked at her across the table. I have not often been seen by someone who wanted nothing in return for the seeing. Clara didn't know what to say to that. So she said the true thing. You didn't need to be seen. You just needed someone to stop pretending they couldn't see what was happening. Theodore nodded slowly. As if that confirmed something he'd been sitting with for days. I will come back Thursday, he said, if that's acceptable. I'll make tea, she said. He came Thursday, and the Thursday after. And the one after that. They argued about history, specifically about the role of the railroad in the displacement of farming communities. Which was a subject Clara had opinions about, and Theodore listened to with an expression she eventually identified as the focused attention of a man who knows considerably more about a topic than the person speaking but is genuinely interested in their perspective anyway. She noticed that, stored it away, said nothing about it. She was also quietly, methodically, looking for work. Letters to the school board, inquiry at the church. The newspaper office, every respectable establishment on Main Street. In her blue dress with the mended collar, with her precise and careful voice, and the particular dignity of a woman who is asking for what she has earned and not what she is owed. Most people were kind, some were not. Several said, carefully, that they'd heard about the incident, and that they unfortunately had relationships to consider. One woman, the wife of a grain merchant named Helen Carr, took Clara's hand at the end of a brief and difficult conversation and said, what you did was right, honey. Being right has never put coal in anyone's furnace. But it was right, and I want you to know that some saw it. Clara thanked her and walked home and sat at the kitchen for a long time. She was not hopeless. She was precise about the distinction. Hopeless was something else, a different weight, a different color. This was the particular endurance of someone who could see the situation clearly, who knew it was not permanent, who had a deep enough reserve of stubbornness to outlast it. She just didn't know yet what was going to break first. Herself, or the circumstances. She did not know she was being watched. Not by Theodore, though he was watching, in the careful way of someone who cares about a person and is not yet certain what they should do about it. He had told her nothing. He had asked questions and listened to answers and drunk his Thursday tea. And every week he came back, and she had started to count on it in the small, practical way. She counted on things she didn't want to admit she needed. But someone else entirely had heard about Clara Bennet. Nathaniel Crawford received the story the way news usually reached him, third hand, filtered through his lawyer, Arthur Pennock, who had gotten it from someone at the grain hall, who had gotten it from Marta Elkins at the post office. Nathaniel Crawford, 34 years old, owner of the Crawford estate, 12 miles east of Harlow Creek. Primary investor in the railway extension that would reach the county by spring. The most consequential private figure in the region, and the one least interested in being known as such. He was in his study when Pennock delivered the summary. He listened without interrupting. He always listened without interrupting, which people tended to mistake for patience, and was actually something closer to the habit of a man who had learned that people reveal more when they believe they have not yet been fully heard. A woman, Nathaniel said when Pennock finished. Clara Bennett, 26, schoolteacher's daughter, was the assistant librarian until she grabbed Charles Montgomery's wrist at a public auction and told him to pick up what he'd knocked down. Yes, sir. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment and lost her position over it 3 days later, and has not, Nathaniel said slowly, spoken to the newspaper, has not sought sympathy publicly, has not in any documented way attempted to use the incident for her own advancement. As far as I can determine. No, sir. Nathaniel stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Crawford land ran to the tree line, flat and quiet in the late afternoon light. 12 miles of it, built by 3 generations of men who had understood that real power operated quietly, and from a distance. There's something else, Pennock said. Nathaniel turned. She is a regular caller, elderly gentleman, renting a room above the dry goods on Clement Street. Name of Theodore Whitaker. The room went very still. Pennock noticed. He was a careful man, he did not ask. Send word to my uncle, Nathaniel said. Tell him I'm coming. Your Pennock stopped himself. Reset. Yes, sir, when? Tomorrow morning. Nathaniel turned back to the window. Outside, the land his family had built sat quiet and permanent in the fading light. And he thought about a woman in a mended collar who had grabbed the wrist of the most dangerous man in town to make him pick up a piece of paper off the floor, and had done it without shaking, and had paid for it, and had not complained. He thought about what that cost. He thought about what kind of person absorbs that cost without flinching. He did not have a name for it yet, but he thought he wanted to find out. He rode in the next morning alone. No carriage, no associate, just a horse in ordinary clothes and 12 miles of road. He tied up on Clement Street and went up the narrow stairs above the dry goods and knocked. Theodore opened the door. They looked at each other. You could have told me, Nathaniel said. I could have, Theodore agreed. Come in. The room was small and deliberate. A bed, a single chair, and on the table, the writing desk. Dark walnut, 2 small drawers, sitting quietly in the morning light as if it had always been there. Nathaniel looked at it for a moment. You bought a desk, he said. I did. At the auction, yes. He turned to his uncle. Theodore had lowered himself onto the edge of the bed with the careful, practiced movement of a man who has made his peace with what his body does and doesn't do anymore. He held his cane across both knees and waited with the patience of someone who has had this conversation many times in his imagination and is in no particular hurry now that it is actually happening. 3 months, Nathaniel said. Yes. And you didn't send word? No. Why? Theodore looked at his hands for a moment. Because I needed to see something, he said, and I couldn't see it as a Crawford. I needed to be nobody. I needed to see what this town did with a nobody. Nathaniel was quiet. And what did it do, he asked. Mostly what towns do, Theodore said. It looked away. It found the easier thing. He paused. But there was one exception. He told Nathaniel the whole of it. The auction. Clara's voice, her hand on Montgomery's wrist. The card on the floor. The way the room had gone quiet. He told him about the dismissal, which he'd heard through the ordinary channels of a small town. About the Thursday mornings. About the careful, methodical, entirely unpublicized job search. He told him about the conversation at the table, the question about what it was that made her move. Specifically in the answer she'd given. Your face. You weren't humiliated. You were accustomed to it. When he finished, the room was quiet. Nathaniel stood very still at the window. She has never asked you for anything, he said. Not once. She doesn't know who you are, I have not told her. And you've been, he stopped. Turned. Uncle Theodore, you have been having Thursday morning tea with a woman who doesn't know you're a Crawford. Who defended you at a public auction at significant personal cost. And you have said nothing. I told you, Theodore said. I needed to see something, and I saw it. He met Nathaniel's eyes. She is the same every single Thursday. She doesn't treat me as a project or a pity case or a mystery to solve. She makes tea and she argues about history, and she tells me the truth about things. And she is the same every time, regardless. Nathaniel looked at the desk on the table. The Crawford Estate Library, he said. The position has been open for 8 months. I know. You want me to offer it to her. I want you, Theodore said carefully, to go and meet her, without telling her who I am. Without telling her who you are, not immediately. Go and meet her as a man. And use the eyes God gave you and see what you see. He paused. And then decide. Nathaniel looked at his uncle, old Theodore, who had helped build the Crawford fortune in the years before grief had made him choose the quiet life, who had more wisdom in his worn hands than most men accumulated in a lifetime, who was sitting on the edge of a small bed in a rented room above a dry goods store in Harlow Creek because he had needed to see what the world did with a nobody. She's going to figure out who you are, Nathaniel said. Probably, Theodore agreed. She's quite sharp, and she'll be angry you didn't tell her. Theodore's mouth curved slightly. Also probably, and that doesn't concern you. A woman who gets angry at being lied to, Theodore said, is a woman worth knowing. I find I'm less interested in people who don't. Nathaniel picked up his hat from the chair. All right, he said. Thursday? Thursday, Theodore said. She makes tea. Bring a reason to be there that she'll believe. Nathaniel looked at him. What kind of reason? Theodore looked at the desk. At the walnut surface and the 2 small drawers, bought at a county auction in front of a room full of people who had looked away. Tell her, he said, that you're looking for someone to manage a private library. Tell her the truth about the position, just not yet about who I am. He looked at his nephew. Let her decide based on the work, not on the name. Nathaniel put his hat on. He thought about a woman he hadn't met, standing in a crowded auction hall, with her hand around the wrist of the most dangerous man in town, telling him to pick up what he had knocked down, not shaking, not backing away, paying the price in full and not complaining. He thought about what kind of person did that. He thought about what kind of person he had become. Over 12 miles and 34 years, and the weight of a name that preceded him into every room. Thursday, he said, and walked out into the Harlow Creek morning. 12 miles from home, toward something he didn't have a name for yet, but thought for the first time in a long time might be worth the finding. Thursday came the way it always did, without ceremony. Clara had the kettle on before 8. She did it automatically now. The way you do things that have quietly become part of the shape of your week, without you deciding they would. She told herself it was habit. She told herself Theodore was simply a pleasant way to spend a morning when there was nothing else to fill it. She had become very good in the past weeks at telling herself things that were mostly true. She set out 2 cups. She had bought a second cup specifically. She had not examined that decision too closely. The knock came at 9:05. She opened the door. It was not Theodore. The man standing on the step was tall, somewhere in his early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of face that had been shaped by weather and decision rather than comfort. He wore plain clothes, not poor, not fine, and held his hat in both hands with the particular self-possession of someone who did not need props to feel at ease in a room. He looked at her directly, not the way men usually looked at her, scanning, categorizing, filing. He looked at her the way you look at someone you are genuinely trying to understand. Miss Bennet, he said. She did not know him. She was certain of that. She would have remembered this face. Yes, she said carefully. My name is Nathaniel Crawford. He paused 1 beat. I believe you're acquainted with my uncle, Theodore Whitaker. The kettle began to whistle behind her. Clara looked at this man, this Nathaniel Crawford, whose name she recognized from the way Harlow Creek said it, with that specific involuntary deference reserved for names that owned things, and she felt the ground shift slightly beneath her understanding of the past 4 weeks. "Come in," she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. She went and took the kettle off the heat. He sat where Theodore always sat. She set the second cup in front of him without asking, and poured without asking, and he watched her do it with an expression she couldn't fully read. Careful, attentive, something working behind his eyes that he wasn't showing on the surface yet. She sat down across from him. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About my uncle being in Harlow Creek?" He wrapped both hands around the cup. 4 days. He didn't tell you himself, no. And he suggested I come. A small distinction. He was precise about it. There's a difference. Clara looked at him across the table. "Mr. Crawford," she said, "I don't know what Theodore told you about me. And I don't know what you've heard from other sources. And I don't particularly care which version brought you to this door. But I'd like to know what you actually want. Plainly. If possible. I've had a complicated few weeks and I find I have less patience than usual for the indirect approach." Something moved in his expression. Not offense. Closer to the thing that moves across a person's face when they've been braced for one thing and received another. "All right," he said. Plainly. "I own the Crawford estate. 12 miles east. My grandfather built a private library there 30 years ago. It hasn't been properly managed in about 15 of those years. I've been looking for someone to catalog, restore, and organize the collection. I've spoken to 4 candidates since the spring. None of them were right. What made them wrong?" Clara asked. "They treated the books as inventory," he said. "Lists of things to be counted and shelved. Not as what they actually are. What are they actually?" He looked at her steadily. "A record of the people who read them. A record of what a family thought was worth keeping." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Theodore told you I'm a librarian," she said. He said. Quietly. "Not Cruwas," she agreed. "Who told you why?" "I have a lawyer who asks questions," Nathaniel said. "I also have ears, and Harlow Creek is a small town." He met her eyes. "I know what you did at the auction. I know what it cost you. And I know that you have spent the past 3 weeks looking for work without once telling anyone that Charles Montgomery was directly responsible for your being dismissed." Clara set her cup down with more care than was strictly necessary. "It wouldn't have helped to say so." "No," Nathaniel agreed. "It wouldn't. But most people say it anyway." He paused. "You didn't. Saying it would have made me look like I was asking for sympathy," Clara said. "I wasn't. I was asking for work. Those are different conversations." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she felt the weight of it without knowing quite what it carried. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I'm offering you the position at the Crawford Estate Library. Salary above what you were making at the public library. Housing in the East Wing if you choose, or you may remain in town and travel out. The work is yours to define. I won't tell you how to organize something I haven't been able to organize myself." Clara looked at her cup. "Why?" she said. You explained the position," she said. "I'm asking why me. Specifically now, after what happened at the auction." "Because Mr. Crawford," she looked up. "I am not naive enough to believe that a man in your position rides 12 miles on a Thursday morning to offer a job to a dismissed librarian out of pure coincidence." Nathaniel was quiet. Then he said, "My uncle asked me to open my eyes." "To what?" "To what it looks like," he said slowly. "When someone does the right thing with nothing to gain and everything to lose. And what it costs them." He looked at the table. "And what it says about the rest of us that we let them pay that cost alone." The room was very still. Clara pressed her lips together. She looked out the window. She thought about the desk she hadn't bought, the job she'd lost. Montgomery on this same front step, telling her she was making a significant error in judgment. The letters she'd written, the doors that had closed. She thought about Theodore's face at the auction, that particular private exhaustion of a man who had stopped expecting anything better. She thought, I wonder if that's what I look like now. I have a condition, she said. Nathaniel waited. I work, she said. Not as a charity case. Not as someone your family is doing a favor for. If I take this position, I take it because I am the right person for the work, and because the salary reflects that. And because no one, not you, not your uncle, not anyone on that estate ever implies otherwise, she held his eyes. I will not be a story someone tells about their own goodness. I am not a good deed, I am a librarian. Nathaniel held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he said, I wouldn't have it any other way. Clara picked up her cup. When do I start, she said. Theodore arrived 40 minutes later. He came in the way he always did, knock, pause, wait, and Clara opened the door and looked at him and said nothing for a moment. Theodore looked back at her with the expression of a man who is prepared to receive whatever is coming and has decided in advance not to defend himself. You could have told me, she said. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? He came inside slowly and settled into his usual chair. Nathaniel had quietly moved to stand near the window and wrapped his old hands around nothing, since there was no cup in front of him yet, and looked at the table. Because if you had known who I was, he said, you would have treated me differently. Not badly. I don't think you're capable of treating anyone badly. But differently, more carefully, with an awareness of what you might need from me or what I might need from you. He looked up. What I needed was to know what you were like when there was nothing to need. Clara looked at him. That is the most manipulative thing anyone has ever said to me, she said, while simultaneously being the most honest. Theodore's mouth curved. I've had 72 years to develop that particular skill. I'm still angry, she said. I know, he said. You're allowed to be. She went and poured him his tea. She set it in front of him. She sat down. I took the position, she said. I know that too, he said. He looked at his nephew at the window. Nathaniel told you the terms? We negotiated them, Nathaniel said mildly. Miss Bennet negotiated, I agreed. Theodore looked at Clara. Something in his expression warmed. Good, he said. The Crawford Library has been waiting for someone who would negotiate. She gave her notice to Mrs. Greer that evening, not because she was required to. The boarding house wasn't a formal arrangement, but because the woman deserved to hear it directly from Clara, with adequate time to fill the room. Mrs. Greer listened to the whole explanation without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when Clara finished, she sat down in her kitchen chair and folded her hands on the table and looked at them for a moment. The Crawford estate, she said. Yes, Nathaniel Crawford came here personally, Thursday morning. And Theodore Whitaker, Mrs. Greer looked up the old man. He's a Crawford. His mother's brother's son, Clara said. Complicated family. He left the estate years ago after his wife died, Mrs. Greer was quiet. Then she said very deliberately, Clara Ann Bennet, you grabbed the wrist of Charles Montgomery in public. Lost your position. Turned down an apology you could have used to get it back. And then proceeded to have Thursday morning tea with one of the most connected men in this county for 4 weeks without knowing it. That is an accurate summary, Clara said. And now you're going to manage the Crawford Private Library. Yes, Mrs. Greer looked at the ceiling. Your father, she said, would have laughed until he cried. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't known was tight. He would have, she agreed. Mrs. Greer stood up and patted her shoulder firmly. Once the way she always did and said, your room will be here if you need it. Don't let those people turn you into something you're not. I won't, Clara said. And don't let that Crawford man think the library was his idea. Clara smiled. The first real unguarded smile she'd had in weeks. It wasn't, she said. It was mine the moment I walked through the door. She arrived at the Crawford estate on a Monday morning, 8 days after Nathaniel's visit. She had chosen not to live in the East Wing. She'd told Nathaniel she'd continue to board in town and travel out. He had accepted this without comment, which was one of the things she was beginning to understand about him. He accepted her decisions without making her explain them. She wasn't certain whether that was respect or indifference. She suspected she'd find out eventually. The library was worse than she'd expected. Not in size, it was extraordinary in size, the kind of room that revealed itself slowly. Ceiling-to-floor shelves on 3 walls, a rolling ladder on a brass rail. A fireplace at the far end that had been dark long enough that the grate held a fine coat of gray. The collection was immense, and it had been clearly loved once, but 15 years without order had done their work. Books shelved spine in, books shelved sideways, stacked on other books, doubled up on shelves built for one row. No apparent cataloging system. Or rather 3 apparent cataloging systems, none of which agreed with each other. Applied in different decades by different hands, none of which had communicated with the others. Clara stood in the middle of the room for a long moment. Then she took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and started at the northwest corner. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway an hour later. She was on the ladder. She had already pulled down approximately 40 books and sorted them into 3 piles on the floor, with a logic that was clear to her and would have been inexplicable to anyone else. "I thought you might want someone to," he started. "I don't need help yet," she said without looking down. "I need to understand the system before anyone else touches it. If someone helps before I understand it, I'll have to undo what they did and start again." A pause. "All right," he said. "You can come in if you're quiet," she added. "I don't mind company. I mind interruption." She heard him come in. She heard him find a chair, the leather one, near the fireplace, and sit in it. She heard nothing else, just the sound of her own hands moving through decades of accumulated neglect. She had not expected quiet from him. She had expected the particular restlessness of a man who is accustomed to running things and finds it difficult to be in a room without running something. She had met men like that. They filled silences with themselves. Nathaniel Crawford sat in the chair and read. He had brought a book from somewhere, or picked one from a pile and said nothing, and she was aware of his presence without being distracted by it, which was a very specific and unusual thing. After an hour, she came down the ladder. The original collection, she said, was organized by acquisition date. Someone sometime in the 1860s, I'd guess, decided to reorganize by subject. Someone else reorganized by language. None of these people left notes. She looked at her piles. "I need 2 weeks to inventory what's here before I touch the organization." Nathaniel looked up from the book. 2 weeks. Minimum. The last candidate wanted to begin shelving on day 2. The last candidate, Clara said, didn't understand what they were dealing with. She looked at the room. "This isn't a disorder problem. It's a history problem. These books were put here by specific people for specific reasons. And if I reorganize without understanding the reasoning, I'll destroy something that can't be recovered." She paused. "I need to read the collection before I organize it." Nathaniel was looking at her with that expression. She was beginning to identify the focused, slightly arrested attention of a man who has been surprised. "All right," he said. 2 weeks. Possibly 3, she said honestly. "All right," he said again. She picked up her notebook and went back up the ladder. The first argument happened on day 4. She had discovered, behind a set of agricultural volumes in the northeast corner, a small collection of books that had been wrapped in cloth and pressed behind the others, deliberately hidden. Or at least deliberately separated. Old books. Very old. A French primer dated 1821. A volume of Italian verse. A journal with no name on the cover, the handwriting small and careful and feminine. She brought them down and set them on the reading table and opened the journal. She read 3 pages. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in his study, a room at the other end of the house that she had not been in. And she knocked and he said, "Come in," and she came in and set the journal on his desk without preamble. "Did you know this was in there?" she asked. He looked at the journal. His expression changed. Where did you find it? Behind the agricultural collection. Northeast corner, with a French primer and a book of Italian verse. She looked at him. The handwriting in the journal. Is it your grandmother's? He was quiet for a moment. My great-aunt's, he said. My grandfather's sister. There was a period of difficulty in the family. She was not permitted to. He stopped. She was kept at the estate for several years. Before she was sent to live with family in Philadelphia. She was teaching herself, Clara said. In secret. The Italian, the French. She looked at the journal. The journal documents it. Lesson by lesson. She was teaching herself in the library when no one was watching. Nathaniel looked at the journal on his desk and did not speak. The collection wasn't just books, Clara said quietly. For at least one person in your family, it was a way out. A way to become something the rest of the house didn't permit. She paused. I thought you should know that before I finished the inventory. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped. She was aware that she was an employee of 4 days who had walked into his private study and placed his family history on his desk. Then he said, Is she mentioned in any of the other volumes? I haven't gotten to the other volumes yet, Clara said. But yes, I think so. The primer has annotations in the same hand. He looked up at her. Tell me what you find, he said, as you find it. All right, she said. She picked up the journal. She was at the door when he said, Miss Bennet. She turned. I was wrong about something, he said. She waited. This isn't a disorder problem, he said. You were right. It's a history problem. He looked at the empty desk where the journal had been. I don't think I understood what I had in that room until right now. Clara looked at him for a moment. Most people don't, she said. That's why the books get neglected. Not from cruelty, just from not knowing what you're looking at. She went back to the library. She stayed until dark. It was Marta Elkins who told her about Montgomery. She was in town on Wednesday. Supplies a letter to post. The ordinary business of a week when Marta appeared at her elbow, outside the dry goods, with the expression of a woman who has been waiting to deliver news and has finally found her moment. He's saying things, Marta said. Clara looked at her. Who is Montgomery? Marta glanced left. Then right, which was Marta's way of indicating that the information was serious without being willing to admit that she was performing seriousness. He's telling people you manipulated your way into the Crawford estate. That you used the auction incident to get sympathy from Nathaniel Crawford and leveraged it into a position. Clara stood very still. He's saying, Marta continued, lowering her voice, that you knew all along that the old man was a Crawford. That the whole thing was calculated. The street noise continued around them. A horse. Someone's door. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Wednesday. And are people believing him? Clara asked. Marta's expression said everything. Some are, she said. Enough. Clara breathed. Thank you for telling me, she said. What are you going to do? Work, Clarissa said. The same thing I was doing yesterday. Marta grabbed her arm as she turned. Clara, Montgomery doesn't just talk, he acts. He's already spoken to 2 people on the county school board. He's trying to close doors before you can open them. The estate position is one thing, but if he convinces enough of the right people that you're a schemer, then people who believed him didn't know me well enough to matter, Clara said. Her voice was level. Her chest was not. That's a very noble thing to say, Marta said. And a very impractical way to live. I know, Clara said quietly. I know it is. She went home. She sat at the small table in her room at Mrs. Greer's. She sat there for a long time in the early afternoon light, and she did not write anything, and she did not pace, and she did not cry. She thought about her father, who had taught school in this town for 23 years, who had educated children whose families could not pay him, who had been precise and honest and good, who had died with $40 in savings and more love in that town than he would ever have known. Because he was too busy working to count it, she thought. Is this what being honest costs every time? every person who tries it. She didn't have an answer. She went back to the estate the next morning and climbed the ladder and kept working. Nathaniel found out about Montgomery's campaign on Friday. She hadn't told him. She had decided carefully and deliberately not to tell him, not because she was protecting him, but because she refused to be the kind of employee who arrived at her employer's door 4 days into the job with a crisis that required his intervention. She would handle it. She was still working out how. But she would handle it. He found out because Arthur Pennock told him. Pennock had heard it from 2 separate sources, which in Harlow Creek meant the information was already in wide circulation. He came to the library. She was at the reading table, cross-referencing what she'd pulled from the northeast corner against a ledger she'd found that might be an original acquisition record. She heard his footsteps. She knew them already, she realized. 4 days and she already knew the particular rhythm of his walk. "You know," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked up. "I know," she said. "Why didn't you tell me? Because it's my problem to solve." "Not yours. It became mine," he said. "The moment he started telling people you calculated your way into my employ. It became yours when he made it about the estate," she said. "It was mine first." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, not the way he usually did. With that deliberate, settled quality, he sat down quickly, like a man whose patience has been used up somewhere between the door and the table. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked at him. "I know you don't want to need help," he said. "I know that you are entirely capable of going to war with Charles Montgomery on your own, and probably winning. Eventually, at considerable personal cost over a very long time." He looked at her steadily. "But I have resources that would take you years to build. And Montgomery knows that, and that is why he is moving now while you are new to the estate. Before your position is established, because he understands that a lie travels fastest in the space before the truth is known." Clara was quiet. "He is not afraid of you," Nathaniel said. "He is afraid of what you represent. A woman with no connections who told the truth in public and then built something from the ruins of what it cost her. If that story lands right, if people see it the way it actually happened, his version of the story dies." He paused. "And he knows it." Clara looked at the ledger in her hands, at the careful columns of acquisition dates and costs and donors, recorded by someone long dead, building something they believed was worth building. "What are you proposing?" she said. "The estate hosts a dinner at the end of each month," he said. "County families, business contacts, the kind of people whose opinion shapes the air that smaller opinions breathe." He met her eyes. "Come, as the estate librarian, as what you are. Let people see the position and what it means. You want to use me as a statement," she said. "I want to give you a room," he said, "in which to speak for yourself." She looked at him. And Theodore paused. "Theodore will be there," he said. "As himself. As a Crawford." He said it simply, the way you say something you've thought about a great deal and arrived at with great care. "It's past time." Clara set the ledger down on the table slowly. She thought about the woman in the journal, the one who had taught herself French and Italian in secret, in a library that didn't know she was there, because there was no other way. She thought about what it costs to become yourself in a world that has decided in advance what you are. "All right," she said. "All right. One condition." He waited. "Theodore announces himself on his own terms," she said. "Not as a prop for your statement or mine. On his own terms, when he decides he's ready." She looked at Nathaniel steadily. "He gets to choose what he reveals and when. That belongs to him." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "You're protecting him," he said. "Even now." "He protected something important when he stayed quiet," she said. "Whatever his reasons were, I understand them better than he probably knows." She looked at the ledger. "Not everyone has the luxury of being a Crawford. Some people need the anonymity to find out what the world is actually like." The room was very quiet. Then Nathaniel said, low and careful, as if he were saying something he hadn't meant to say out loud. "And what did the world turn out to be like? from where you were standing. Clara looked at him. Smaller than it should be, she said, and occasionally, unexpectedly better. Nathaniel held her gaze for one long, still moment. Then he looked away first. She was walking back to the main road 2 hours later when she heard the horse. She turned. Charles Montgomery was sitting on a gray horse at the edge of the lane, the estate lane. Crawford property, 12 miles from town, looking at her with that same pleasant, dangerous expression, and she understood immediately that he had followed her. Or had someone follow her, and had come here specifically to this place, to make a particular kind of point. She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the lane and waited. He walked the horse forward slowly, until he was close enough that she had to look up at him. And he looked down at her with the satisfied expression of a man who has arranged things exactly as he intended. "Miss Bennet," he said pleasantly, "I'd heard you'd taken a position out here." "You've heard correctly," she said. Quite a turnaround. He let his eyes move over her slowly. Deliberately, the same way he'd looked at Theodore at the auction. Cataloging, measuring, finding wanting. From the town library to the Crawford estate in 3 weeks. "That's an extraordinary piece of luck." "It's an extraordinary piece of work," she said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He smiled. "Some people might call it calculation." "Some people might," she said. "Those people would be wrong." He looked down the lane toward the house. "Nathaniel Crawford is a very serious man. It surprises me that he would make a hire based on a single incident at a county auction." "Then you'd have to ask him his reasons," Clara said. "I can only speak to the work." "The work." He brought his eyes back to her. "A woman who grabs men's wrists in public and loses her position for it isn't generally considered a reliable professional reference." "Miss Bennet." "And yet here I am," Clara said. Montgomery looked at her for a long moment. "I wonder," he said softly, almost gently, "how long you think this lasts." Before Crawford realizes the position was a sentiment and not a decision. Before the county understands what you actually are. He paused. Before the people who are currently impressed by your little stand realize that impressive gestures don't build careers. Clara looked up at him. She thought about her father, about the library steps, about Thursday mornings and tea, and a man who had not told her who he was because he needed to know what she was first. She thought about a journal hidden behind agricultural volumes, written in careful secret by a woman who needed the world to not know what she was learning until she had learned enough to matter. She said, "Mr. Montgomery, the last time we spoke, you told me I was making a significant error in judgment." "I did," he said. "And what I've done since then," she said, "is go to work." She turned and walked down the lane. She heard him sit there behind her. She heard the horse shift weight. She did not look back. Not once. She walked the full length of the lane with her spine straight and her chin level and her hands completely still at her sides. And she did not let herself feel the full weight of it until she reached the road and turned the corner, and was alone. Then she stopped. She breathed. She pressed one hand flat against a fence post, and she breathed. "All right," she said. "All right." She straightened. She walked back toward Harlow Creek. She had work to do. The dinner was set for the last Friday of September. Clara had 9 days. She spent 7 of them in the library and told herself the dinner was not something she was thinking about. She was good at telling herself things. She had gotten considerably better at it over the past month. The work was real, at least. The work was honest. She had completed the full inventory of the northwest and northeast corners, cross-referenced everything against the acquisition ledger she'd found, and begun building a catalog system from scratch, one that accounted for all 3 previous systems without destroying the logic of any of them. It was the kind of problem she was built for. Complicated. Patient, requiring the particular attention of someone who could hold many threads at once without pulling the wrong one. Nathaniel came to the library every day, not to supervise. She had made clear, early and directly, that she did not need supervision. And he had accepted this the way he seemed to accept most of her positions, without argument, without wounded pride, with the specific quality of a man who has decided that a person who knows what they're doing should be allowed to do it. He came because he was interested. That was the truth of it. And she had stopped pretending otherwise somewhere around day 6. He would come in, find the chair near the fireplace, and read, or sometimes he would ask her something about the collection, about what she'd found, about the great-aunt's journal, which she had been working through page by page and reporting on as she went. The great-aunt's name, she had discovered, was Margaret. Margaret Crawford, who had been 21 in 1841 when the journal began, who had written in small, careful letters as if she was afraid of taking up too much space, who had taught herself French and Italian and a fair amount of Latin from books she'd pulled from this same library. In this same room, while everyone around her was deciding what she was allowed to become. Clara told Nathaniel about Margaret the way she would tell anyone something that mattered to her directly, with full attention, without softening the parts that were difficult. Nathaniel listened the same way. He didn't perform emotion about it. He simply received it, and she could see from his face that it was landing in him and changing something. Quietly, the way real things change people. On the 8th day, 3 days before the dinner, she found the letter. It was pressed inside the back cover of the Italian verse collection, folded 4 times. The paper thin as skin, the ink faded to a pale brown that was nearly the color of the page. The handwriting was Margaret's. Clara recognized it immediately. She read it standing at the table. Then she sat down. Then she read it again. The letter was dated April 1848. It was addressed to no one. It began, "I am writing this because there is no one to write it to, and because if I do not put it somewhere outside myself, I will lose the shape of it. I have been asked to leave. I have been told that my presence here disturbs the order of the household. I have been told this kindly, which is its own cruelty. I am going to Philadelphia. I have sufficient French now to teach it. If anyone in Philadelphia is willing to pay a woman to teach, I am afraid. I am also, for the first time in 7 years, something that might be hope." Clara sat at the table with the letter in her hands for a long time. Then she got up and went to find Nathaniel. He was in his study. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She came in and set the letter on his desk the same way she had set the journal there, without preamble, without softening it. He read it. She watched his face while he read. She had learned in 9 days that his face was not expressionless, it was simply contained. Things moved through it, the way weather moves through a landscape. You have to know how to read. He finished. He set the letter down. "Did she make it?" he said. His voice was quiet. "To Philadelphia." "I don't know yet," Clara said. "I haven't found anything else." He looked at the letter. She went anyway." "Yes," Clara said. He looked up at her. There was something in his face she hadn't seen there before, something stripped of the careful management he usually kept over himself. Something that was just a man, sitting with a piece of his family's history that he hadn't known was there. Understanding it for the first time. "Like you," he said. Clara looked at him. "I'm not Margaret Crawford," she said. "No," he said. "But you read her letter and you went and found me. You didn't sit on it. You didn't protect me from it." He looked at the desk. "Every person I've met in the last 5 years has protected me from difficult things. Because of the name, because of what I can do for them or to them." He paused. "You brought me a letter that told me something hard about my family and put it on my desk. Because you thought I should know." "You should know," Clara said simply. "It's your history, it is," he said, "and you treated it like it mattered." The room was very quiet. "She matters," Clara said. "Margaret. She was real. She was afraid, and she taught herself 3 languages in secret, in a room that was supposed to be for other people. And she left with enough French to make a life, and she was 28 years old." She looked at him steadily. She matters as much as any Crawford who ever put their name on a building. Nathaniel held her eyes. Yes, he said. He stood, he picked up the letter. He held it carefully, the way you hold something fragile. Something that cannot be replaced. I'm going to find out what happened to her, he said. In Philadelphia. I'd like to know too, Clara said. He looked at her. When I find out, he said, you'll be the first person I tell. She nodded. She turned to go. Clara, she stopped. She was getting used to the way he said her name, now direct. Without ornamentation, like everything else about him. The dinner, he said. Are you prepared? She thought about the 9 days. The library, the work, the way she had been not thinking about the dinner. I'll be ready, she said. It wasn't entirely true. But it was true enough. The night of the dinner arrived the way difficult things always do, faster than expected. Before you feel entirely equipped for them, she wore the dark blue dress. She had bought new thread, all the same color this time, and remended the collar so that the repair was nearly invisible unless you already knew to look for it. She had looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand and thought, this is what you have, it is enough. She arrived at the Crawford estate at 7. The main house was lit from within, and the sound of voices and the smell of good food reached her before she was through the door. A servant showed her in. She stood for a moment in the entrance and counted what she was walking into. 30-odd people, county families, business associates. The carefully assembled world of the kind of wealth that builds itself over generations and has learned to look effortless. She found Theodore first. He was standing near the fireplace in the main sitting room, the same brown coat. She noticed immediately replaced. He was wearing a suit she had not seen before. Dark and well cut, and he held himself differently than he did in her kitchen. Not falsely, more completely, as if a dimension of him that had been stored away had been taken out and put back on. He was, she realized, looking at her from across the room. She crossed to him. You look like yourself, she said quietly. I feel like myself, he said. It's been some time. She stood beside him and looked at the room. Are you all right? I am quite all right, he said. Though I confess I am watching to see whether any of these people remember me. And do they? 3 have already looked at me twice, he said. With a small dry note of satisfaction. By the end of the evening, someone will place me. That is the moment I am waiting for. You're enjoying this, Clara said. Immensely, he agreed. She almost laughed. She pressed her lips together instead. Then she felt it, the particular shift in a room when the temperature of attention changes. She looked up. Charles Montgomery was there. He was standing across the room with a glass in his hand and the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere and found it exactly as he expected and is already deciding how to use it. He had seen her, she knew the moment he did, because his expression didn't change at all. Which was how she knew he had been expecting her to be there. Her stomach tightened. Theodore touched her arm. Brief? Light, steady, he said quietly. I'm steady, she said. I know. I'm reminding you that you don't have to be anything else. She looked at him. When did you get wise, she said. 1856, he said. At considerable expense. Nathaniel found her 20 minutes later. The room had arranged itself into the complicated social geometry of a dinner party, clusters and currents. The movement of people toward and away from each other, according to rules that were legible only to those who had grown up inside them. Clara had been moving carefully, speaking when spoken to, listening more than she spoke, doing the work of being present without being ostentatious about it. She was in conversation with a woman named Helen Forsyth, wife of the county surveyor. Sharper than her husband, the kind of woman who asks real questions and waits for real answers when Nathaniel appeared at her elbow. Miss Bennet, he said. Mrs. Forsyth. Helen Forsyth looked at him with the expression of a woman who has known a man since he was 12 and is not particularly impressed by what he's become, though she's fond enough of him to admit he's turned out better than expected. Nathaniel, your library's looking better. Miss Bennet's work, he said. She's already found things in there I didn't know existed. Such as? Helen asked. And Nathaniel looked at Clara and said, simply tell her. Clara looked at Helen Forsythe, who was watching her with genuine interest, and she told her about Margaret. About the journal, about the letter, about the Italian verse and the French primer and the small, careful handwriting of a woman teaching herself freedom one word at a time in a room that didn't know she was there. When she finished, Helen Forsythe was quiet for a moment. Margaret Crawford, she said slowly. I know that name. My mother mentioned her once. Said she went east and became a teacher. She looked at Clara. A good one, apparently. My mother said she had a gift for language. She paused. I never knew where she learned it. Clara felt something open in her chest. She learned it here, she said, in that library. Helen Forsythe looked at Nathaniel, then back at Clara. You found all of this in 9 days? The library's been waiting to tell someone for 30 years, Clara said. I just listened. Helen Forsythe turned to the woman beside her and said, in a voice that carried just far enough, you should hear what this woman found in the Crawford Library, and turned away into conversation that would. Clara understood, carry that story across the room, without her having to tell it again. Nathaniel watched this happen. You didn't plan that, he said quietly. No, she said. You just told the truth. It's what I have, she said. He looked at her for a moment that focused, slightly arrested attention. Then he said, low enough that only she could hear. Clara, Montgomery is going to say something tonight. I don't know when, but he's here because he intends to say something. And I want you to be prepared. What kind of something? The kind that's designed to be said in a room like this, he said. Where reputations are soft and the right word at the right moment can do lasting damage. He looked at her steadily. I want to be clear that I will not let it stand. But I also want to be clear that you will have the first word. Because this is your story, not mine. Clara looked at him. Something moved in her. Something complicated. Something she didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was the specific feeling of being seen clearly by someone who has the power to see you otherwise and chooses not to. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. The evening's young. It happened at dinner. 31 people at a long table, crystal and candlelight, and the particular hush of a room that is eating and performing the eating simultaneously. Clara was seated 6 places from Nathaniel, near enough to be visible, far enough to be independent. Theodore was across the table and 3 seats down, engaged in quiet conversation with a man she didn't recognize. Montgomery was seated near the center, close enough to the head of the table to feel important. Far enough from both Clara and Nathaniel to have deniability. He waited until the second course. He waited until the conversation had spread itself thin across the full length of the table the way dinner conversation does, fragmenting into smaller exchanges, creating the kind of ambient noise that makes certain words harder to catch and easier to deny later. Then he said, in a voice pitched at exactly the right volume to carry without appearing to project. It's remarkable, isn't it, how quickly some people manage to find their way into comfortable positions. Almost as if the whole thing were planned from the start. He was talking to the man beside him. He was not looking at Clara. He did not need to. The table shifted. The ambient noise thinned. Several people who had been in separate conversations found their attention drifting. The way attention drifts toward pressure. Clara set her fork down. She looked at her plate. She counted 1, 2, 3. 4 the way her father had taught her. She looked up. Nathaniel was already looking at her, steady, waiting. She gave the smallest possible shake of her head. His jaw tightened. But he waited. I agree, Clara said clearly into the near silence that had formed around Montgomery's comment. It is remarkable. The table went quiet. Montgomery looked at her. Something flickered surprise, quickly managed. Miss Bennet, he said pleasantly. Mr. Montgomery, she picked up her fork again. Set it down again. Old habit. Gave herself 1 more second. You're right that it happened quickly. I was dismissed on a Tuesday and offered the Crawford position 3 weeks later. From the outside, I imagine that does look like it was arranged. She looked at him steadily. Across the candlelight, across 31 people who were now entirely still. But I'd like to offer you the actual sequence of events. Since you seem interested in accuracy, Montgomery smiled. By all means. I attended a county auction, she said. I saw a man humiliate an elderly stranger. I said something about it. I lost my position as a result. I spent 3 weeks looking for work through ordinary channels while Miss Montgomery, she did not look away from him, told anyone who would listen that I was a troublemaker and a schemer. And then I was offered a position based on my qualifications to do work that needed doing. Which I have been doing every day for the past 9 days. She paused. That's the sequence. I'm happy to discuss any part of it in detail if there's something you'd like to clarify. The table was absolutely silent. Montgomery's smile remained. The thing underneath it had gone very cold. And the connection to Theodore Whitaker, he said. Smooth, easy, as if it were a casual curiosity. Some people find it interesting that you befriended Mr. Crawford's uncle before taking a position in his household. I didn't know he was Mr. Crawford's uncle, Clara said. I knew he was a man who had been publicly mocked for the condition of his coat. I had tea with him on Thursday mornings because he was intelligent company, and I was between positions. She looked at Montgomery. If you're suggesting I calculated my way into a friendship for professional advantage, I'd ask you to consider what you know about me that makes calculation seem consistent with my character. Given that my defining professional act was to grab your wrist in public with no gain to myself whatsoever. Something moved around the table. Not laughter more careful than laughter. The sound of people recalibrating. Montgomery's smile was fixed now. It had stopped moving with his eyes. I meant no offense, he began. You meant precisely offense, Clara said. Quietly. You have been meaning offense at me. Systematically, for 3 weeks. You've spoken to the school board. You've spoken to people in this room. You've suggested, consistently, that a woman who told the truth in public must have had dishonest reasons for doing so. She looked at him across the candles. I'd like to know, Mr. Montgomery, what you believe I should have done instead. When you knocked that card out of his hand, what was the correct behavior? From your perspective, the silence was absolute. Montgomery looked at her. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Theodore. Theodore, Clara noticed, had set down his own fork and was watching Charles Montgomery with the particular calm of a man who has been waiting for this moment and is in no hurry now that it has arrived. I think, Montgomery said, pulling his pleasantness back together like a coat in cold weather, that some conversations are best had in private. This one began in public, Clara said. 3 weeks ago, at a county auction. You started it publicly. Mr. Montgomery, I am simply finishing it in the same venue. The woman to Montgomery's left, the wife of the county surveyor, whose name was Helen, whose mother had known Margaret Crawford, set down her own fork and said, without looking at Montgomery, I think that's reasonable. One sentence. Said mildly into the silence. It was enough. The table began, quietly, to breathe again. Conversations resumed carefully. In lower registers, with the specific undertone of people who have witnessed something and are now deciding what they think about it. Montgomery did not speak again for the rest of the meal. Clara picked up her fork and ate. Her hands were perfectly still. After dinner, when the table had dissolved into the sitting rooms and the geometry had rearranged itself, Nathaniel found her by the library door. She had drifted there without intending to, drawn by some kind of gravity to the room where her work was. The room that was beginning to feel like the most honest place in the house. You didn't need me, Nathaniel said. I told you I wouldn't, she said. I know, I believed you. I still needed to see it. He was quiet for a moment. He's not finished, you understand that. I know. He's going to escalate. I know that too, and you're not afraid. She turned and looked at him. I'm afraid all the time, she said. I was afraid at the auction. I was afraid on your front step. I was afraid sitting at that dinner table every second of the past 3 hours. She met his eyes. Fear is not the thing that matters. The thing that matters is what you do while you're afraid. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "My uncle was right about you." "What did he say?" "That you were the same every time." He held her gaze. Regardless, the library door was behind her inside. In the dark, 30 years of a family's accumulated thinking sat in imperfect order, waiting to be understood. Margaret's letter was in Nathaniel's desk. The Italian primer was back on the shelf, in a section Clara had labeled in careful pencil on a small card languages. Self-taught. "I'm going to check on Theodore," she said. "He's been waiting for you," Nathaniel said. "He's been watching you all evening." "I know," she said. "He worries. He loves you," Nathaniel said simply. Like stating went still. "He's known me 6 weeks," she said. "Some people take longer," Nathaniel said. "He's not one of them." She looked at him. She was aware of standing very close to something she didn't have words for, yet something that was not the library. Not the dinner, not Montgomery, not Margaret or her letter or the Italian primer. Something that was in this hallway, in this conversation. In the way this man looked at her like she was the most legible thing in a room full of things he couldn't read. She stepped back. "Good night, Mr. Crawford," she said. Something moved across his face. There and gone. "Good night." "Miss Bennet," he said. She found Theodore in the small sitting room off the main hall. In a chair near the window, looking out at nothing in particular with the expression of a man doing significant internal accounting. She sat down across from him. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. "Are you all right?" "I am," he turned from the window. "I had 3 separate conversations this evening with people who knew me 30 years ago and are now confused about what I'm doing here." He paused. "I told them the truth. All of it, enough of it." He looked at her. "I told them I left after Eleanor died. I told them I needed time to understand the world differently. I told them I found what I was looking for in a small town at a county auction." He paused. "They asked me what I found. What did you tell them? That I found someone who reminded me what decency looks like when it has nothing to gain from being decent." He looked at her steadily. "I used your name. I hope that's all right," Clara breathed. "Yes," she said. "That's all right. Montgomery spoke to me before dinner," Theodore said. Clara went still. "He came to did. He was very polite about it." Theodore's voice was dry as summer dust. "He said he hoped I understood that Miss Bennet's motives were not what they appeared. He suggested that a man of my experience should be careful about being used by someone clever." Clara stared at him. "He tried to turn you against me," she said. "He tried," Theodore agreed. "It was a professional effort. I'll give him that." He looked at her. "I told him that in 72 years I had met a great many clever people and a much smaller number of honest ones. And that I had learned to tell the difference, and that Miss Bennet was honest. And that if he said otherwise in my presence again, I would say so loudly and in public, and he would find the experience embarrassing." Clara stared at him. "You threatened him," she said. Mildly, Theodore said. With great courtesy, she looked at this old man in his good suit, in this room, looking at her with those steady, complicated eyes, and she thought about the auction. And the brown coat, and the writing desk, and the Thursday mornings, and the cup of tea she had poured without asking, because she had simply assumed he'd want one. She thought, "I have known this man 6 weeks, and he threatened Charles Montgomery on my behalf with great courtesy." "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just keep doing what you're doing." "Which is?" He smiled the small, deep smile that came from somewhere far inside him. The one she'd come to know as the expression he wore when he was most entirely himself. "Being exactly what you are," he said, without apology, without calculation, without performing it for anyone's benefit. He looked at her. "That is the rarest thing I know, Clara. Don't let Montgomery, or this house, or any of this take it from you. Clara looked at the floor. He's not finished, she said quietly. No, Theodore agreed. He isn't. He's going to find something worse to do. Probably, and Nathaniel is going to want to fight it for me. Almost certainly. She looked up. And what do I do with that? Theodore considered her for a moment. You let him stand beside you, he said. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. There is a difference. And a man worth having understands it. Whether Nathaniel Crawford understands it yet. He tilted his head slightly. That is what I am still watching. Clara looked at him. You're still testing him, she said. I'm still watching, he said. Testing implies I already know what I'm looking for. Watching means I don't know yet, and I'm paying attention. He paused. There's a difference. She almost smiled. You, she said, are the most precise man I have ever met. Your father's daughter, he said. Precision is an occupational habit. She did smile then. And he smiled back. And for a moment they were simply two people who had found each other at a county auction by accident and had built something real out of it. Which was the only way anything real ever got built. She was putting on her coat to leave when Arthur Pennock found her. Nathaniel's lawyer. She had met him once briefly. When she'd come to sign the employment agreement. A careful man. The kind of man who notices everything and comments on nothing. He was noticeably not careful tonight. Miss Bennet, he said. I need to speak with you privately. She looked at him. His expression had the particular quality of information being held under pressure. Now, she said. Before you leave, he said. She followed him into the small room off the entrance, a study of some kind. Books on the walls, a desk. He closed the door. Montgomery has filed a complaint with the county, he said. Clara looked at him. What kind of complaint? He is claiming Pennock stopped. Chose his words carefully. He is claiming that you entered into a scheme with Theodore Whitaker to defraud the Crawford family. That you fabricated the relationship at the auction as a means of gaining access to the estate and the Crawford resources. He paused. He is also claiming that Theodore Whitaker is not mentally competent to have made the decision to endorse your employment. The room was very quiet. Clara stood absolutely still. He is attacking Theodore, she said. His mental competency, yes. To invalidate his endorsement of me. And to suggest that Nathaniel was manipulated by both of you, Clara breathed. She thought about Theodore in the sitting room, his good suit. His small smile, his 72 years of knowing the difference between clever and honest. She thought about him threatening Montgomery with great courtesy. She thought about the fact that Montgomery had known. Even then, what he was going to do next. He hadn't come to Theodore to turn him against her. He'd come to establish, in front of a witness, that Theodore was being protective and emotional. So that later he could use that protectiveness as evidence of incompetence. She felt cold. When was this filed, she asked. This afternoon, Pennock said. Before dinner. He came to the dinner tonight already knowing he'd filed it. The entire dinner. Montgomery's voice across the table, the pleasant smile. The careful questions, all of it performed, with the knowledge that he had already loaded the gun before he walked in the room. Does Nathaniel know, she asked. I came to find you first, Pennock said. I thought you deserved to know before he did. So you could decide how to handle it. Clara looked at him. This careful, quiet man who had apparently decided, sometime in the past 9 days, that she deserved consideration. Thank you, she said. What will you do, he said. Clara thought about Margaret Crawford pressing a letter into the back of a book because there was no one to write it to. Afraid and going anyway at 28 years old. With enough French to make a life. She thought about her father. Teaching in this town for 23 years, precise and honest and good. Dying with $40 and more love than he knew. She thought about herself on the library steps on a Tuesday morning. With her book of poetry and her counted breath and her all right said quietly to no one. She straightened. I'm going to tell Nathaniel, she said. Right now. Tonight. And then, she said. We're going to decide what to do together." She paused at the door. "Pennick," she said. He looked at her. "Theodore is the sharpest man I know," she said. "If Charles Montgomery tries to call his mind into question in a public proceeding, he will regret it in very specific and comprehensive ways." Pennick looked at her for a moment. "I believe you," he said. She went to find Nathaniel. He was in the library. Of course he was. She had come to understand that the library was where he went when he needed to think the same way she went there when she needed to work, which amounted to the same thing for both of them, just expressed differently. He was standing at the window with his back to the door. He turned when she came in. He saw her face. "What happened?" he said. "Pennick told me too. Just now." His voice was quiet. "He's attacking Theodore, yes, to get to you. And to get to you," she said. "He's saying you were deceived. By both of us. That Theodore isn't competent and I'm not honest and you were too trusting to see it." Nathaniel was very still. "He is saying," Nathaniel said slowly, "that my uncle, who built part of what this family has, who is more himself than any man I have ever known, is not capable of forming reliable judgments." "Yes," Clara said. "Because that uncle endorsed you." "Yes. And that I was foolish enough to be manipulated by both of you." "That is the claim." Nathaniel looked at her. Something was happening in his face that she had not seen before. Not the contained, managed quality she was used to. Something beneath that, something older and harder. Something that had been built out of real things over real time. "All right," he said. "All right, what?" "All right," he said again. He said it the way she said it quietly to himself. As a kind of commitment. A breath and a decision made simultaneously. He picked up his coat from the chair. "Where are you going?" she said. "To speak with Montgomery," he said. "Tonight." "Nathaniel," she stepped forward. "If you go to him angry—" "I'm not angry," he said. He looked at her. His eyes were entirely clear. "Anger is what he wants. Anger means I'm reacting. Anger means he's already won the first exchange." He put on his coat. "I'm not angry, I am decided." "There's a difference," Clara said. He looked at her. That arrested, focused attention. "Yes," he said, "there is." She held his eyes. "Let me come with you," she said. He started to say no. "She saw it forming beside you," she said. "Not behind. Not beside." He went still. She watched something move across his face, something that was recognition. And more than recognition, something that understood what she had just said and why she had said it in precisely those words. "Theodore told you," he said quietly. "Theodore watches," she said. "There's a difference." Nathaniel Crawford looked at Clara Bennett in the doorway of his library, in her dark blue dress with the invisible mend, with her book of poetry in her coat pocket and $31 once all she had in the world, and an absolute unwillingness to look away, and he said, "All right." He held out his arm. She took it. They walked out together. Montgomery was still in the sitting room when they found him. He was standing near the fireplace with a glass of brandy and the expression of a man who has fired a shot and is waiting, with practiced patience, for the sound of it landing. He saw them come in together, Clara's hand on Nathaniel's arm. Nathaniel's pace deliberate and unhurried, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear. He had not expected together. "Nathaniel," he said pleasantly. "Miss Bennett, I was just thinking of heading home. I'd ask you to stay a few minutes longer," Nathaniel said. His voice was entirely level. The particular levelness of a man who has decided something and no longer needs to perform anything around it. Montgomery looked at him. Back at him, of course," he said. The remaining guests in the room had gone quiet. Not obviously, people at this level of society had long practice at appearing not to notice things while noticing a flickering. But the room had reorganized itself the way rooms do when something real is about to happen inside them. Nathaniel did not ask for privacy. Clara understood why. What Montgomery had done, he had done publicly, through public channels, in front of a public room. Responding privately would have conceded the wrong ground. I understand you filed a complaint with the county this afternoon, Nathaniel said. Montgomery took a small sip of his brandy. I have concerns, he said carefully, about certain relationships and their effect on decisions made regarding your estate. As a friend of this family, as a business associate, Nathaniel said. Not a friend. Let's be exact to beat. As a business associate, Montgomery amended. Smooth, easy. I have concerns that your uncle's judgment may have been compromised by sentiment, and that those compromised judgments may have led to decisions that don't reflect your actual interests. My uncle's judgment, Nathaniel said, has been the most reliable thing in my life for 34 years. Before I could read, he was teaching me what kind of person to be. Before I understood what this family's name meant, he was showing me what it should mean. He held Montgomery's eyes. I want to be precise about this, Charles. When you file a claim questioning Theodore Whitaker's mental competency, you are not protecting my interests. You are attacking a man you have already publicly humiliated once for the condition of his coat, in front of a room full of people who did nothing, and you are now attempting to use the law as a cruder version of the same weapon. The room was absolutely still. Montgomery's jaw tightened. Just slightly, Nathaniel. I understand you feel. I don't feel, Nathaniel said. I know. There is a difference. He paused one beat. Withdraw the complaint. Montgomery looked at him. I'm not certain that's the appropriate. Withdraw it, Nathaniel said. The same volume, utterly immovable, tonight, before morning. And then I'd like you to consider very carefully the nature of our future business relationship. Because the man you called incompetent helped build the capital base that made every contract between our families possible. He paused. I don't think you'd understood that until right now. Montgomery's eyes moved to Clara. Something cold and deliberate moved across his face. And I suppose Miss Bennet had nothing to say about how this conversation was going to go, he said. Miss Bennet, Clara said, before Nathaniel could speak, would like to say one thing. Both men looked at her. She looked at Montgomery steadily, across the firelight, across the careful social geometry of this room full of people pretending not to listen. I have never once asked Nathaniel Crawford to fight a battle for me, she said. Not when I lost my position. Not when you came to my boarding house. Not when you followed me down the estate lane. Not tonight at dinner. She held his eyes. I am standing here because I chose to, beside a man who asked whether I'd like to come. Not because I needed to be rescued. She paused. The difference matters. Because you have built your entire argument around the idea that I am using people using Theodore. Using Nathaniel to advance myself. And the only evidence you have for that is the fact that they choose to stand beside me. Which, Mr. Montgomery, is not evidence of my manipulation. It is evidence of their judgment. The fire crackled. Someone near the back of the room shifted. Montgomery looked at Clara for a long moment. The pleasant expression was gone entirely now. What was underneath it was not rage, it was colder and more specific. The look of a man who has lost a campaign he designed carefully and is now assessing the damage. You are, he said quietly, a very formidable woman. Miss Bennet. I am a librarian, she said. I have told you that before. He looked at Nathaniel. Something passed between them, the particular communication of two men who have been in the same circles long enough to speak in shorthand. I'll withdraw the complaint, Montgomery said. Tonight, Nathaniel said. Tonight, Montgomery set his glass down on the mantel. He picked up his coat from the chair beside him. He walked toward the door, and he did not look at Clara again. And she understood that this was its own kind of statement, the refusal to acknowledge her as he left. The last gesture of a man who has run out of better ones. He walked out. The door closed, the room breathed. Helen Forsythe, from somewhere to the left, said quietly to the woman beside her. Well, that's been a long time coming. Clara turned back to the fire. Her hands were still. She was fiercely, privately grateful for that. Nathaniel stood beside her and said nothing for a moment. Then low enough for only her to hear, "Are you all right?" "I will be," she said. "Give me 30 seconds." He gave her 30 seconds. He didn't move away. He didn't fill the silence. He simply stood there. Beside her, while she breathed and counted in, said the quiet internal "all right" that had carried her through 6 weeks of harder things than this. When 30 seconds had passed, she said, "We should find Theodore." "Yes," he said. They went to find Theodore. He was exactly where she'd left him, the small sitting room. The chair by the window, except that he was no longer looking at nothing. He was watching the door, and when they came through it together, something in his face settled, the particular relief of a man who has been waiting for people he cares about and has just seen them return intact. "Well," he said. "He's withdrawing the complaint," Nathaniel said. Theodore looked at his nephew for a moment, then at Clara. "Both of you went." "Both of us," Clara confirmed. Theodore looked at their faces, at the way they were standing, at whatever it was that 3 hours of a difficult evening had built between them without either of them apparently noticing it was being built. He said nothing about that. He was, Clara had come to understand, a man of exquisite timing. "Good," he said simply. "Sit down, both of you. You look like you've been carrying something heavy." They sat. Theodore looked at Nathaniel. "I need to tell you something," he said. Nathaniel looked at him. "About the complaint? About why I came to Harlow Creek?" The room went quiet in a different way. Clara looked at Theodore. She had assumed in the weeks since she'd found out who he was that she understood the reason: grief, restlessness, the need to see the world as something other than Crawford. She had not asked for more than he had offered, because she had learned early that people tell you what they're ready to tell you, and the rest is theirs to keep until they aren't. "I wasn't only looking to see the world differently," Theodore said. He looked at his hands. "I came because I had been watching Nathaniel for 2 years, and I was worried." Nathaniel's expression stilled. "Worried," he said. "You had become—" Theodore chose his words with the care of a man who has been rehearsing this and has decided the only way through is directly. "You had become the name, only the name Crawford. The estate, the railway, the investment, the name in every room before you walked into it." He looked at his nephew. "When I first knew you, when you were 12, 14, you used to ask me things. About people. Why they did, what they were afraid of, what they wanted. You were curious about people in the way a person is curious when they actually believe others are as real as themselves." He paused. "I had not seen that in you for a very long time." Nathaniel was very still. "I came," Theodore said, "because I wanted to find out if it was gone entirely or only buried. I thought if I put myself somewhere ordinary, somewhere I was nobody, I might find out what the world does with nobody. And whether the man you'd become would see it." Silence. And Nathaniel said, his voice was quiet, careful. The voice of a man who is not certain he wants to know the answer and is asking anyway. "And I found Clara Bennett," Theodore said, "who saw me. Completely, at a county auction, with nothing to gain." He looked at his nephew. "And then I sent you to meet her, and I watched what happened." "And what happened?" He paused. "What happened is that you started coming back." Nathaniel looked at the floor. Clara looked at Theodore. She was aware that something significant was being said in this room, something that had been waiting to be said for longer than she had been part of any of it. "The Crawford Library," Theodore said to Nathaniel. "You've been in that room every day for 2 weeks. I have work." "You have sat in a chair and read," Theodore said, with gentle precision, "which you had not done for pleasure in 2 years. Because Clara Bennett told you the room was a history and not an inventory. And something in you recognized that that was true. And you started to remember how to look at things the way you used to." He paused. "She did that, without trying to." Nathaniel looked up. He looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him and felt the full weight of this moment, this specific, unrepeatable moment, settle around her like weather. "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just worked." "That," Theodore said, "is exactly what I mean. She stayed late that night. Not by design, the guests left, and the house settled, and somehow she was still there. In the library, by the low light of the fire, with the acquisition ledger, and Margaret's letter, and the particular quiet of a room that has held decades of other people's thinking, and accumulated a patience that was almost like presence. She heard his footsteps before he appeared in the doorway. She had not expected him to come back. She had thought, after the sitting room, after Theodore's words, and the weight of everything the evening had carried, that he would need solitude. She would have. She understood that about herself, the need to take difficult things somewhere private before she could make anything of them. She was still learning what Nathaniel needed. He came in. He didn't take the fireplace chair. He came and stood near the reading table, close enough to see what she was working on, and looked at the ledger and the letter and her handwritten catalog cards. Theodore went to bed, he said. He looked tired, she said. He looked content, Nathaniel said. That's different. She set down her pen. She turned slightly so she could see his face. He was looking at the table, at the letter, at Margaret's careful, faded handwriting. She made it to Philadelphia, he said. Clara looked up. You found something? My grandmother mentioned her in a letter I found tonight. In my study. I wasn't looking for it. It was in a bundle I've been meaning to go through for years. He picked up Margaret's letter from the table, held it carefully. She says Margaret taught French and Italian to the daughters of 3 Philadelphia families. She says she was the word my grandmother uses is luminous. He set the letter down. She never married. She died in 1891. She was 71 years old. Clara breathed. She made it, she said. She made it, he agreed. She thought about Margaret at 28, afraid, with enough French to make a life, pressing a letter into the back of a book because there was no one to write it to, walking out of the Crawford estate into uncertainty with the particular courage of someone who has run out of the alternative. She thought, I wonder if she knew how far she'd go. She thought, I wonder if she knew anyone would find her letter. We should add her to the catalog, Clara said. There should be a record. Her name, the dates, what she taught herself, what she became. Nathaniel looked at her. Yes, he said, there should. He sat down across from her at the table. Not the fireplace chair, the working chair, the one that put him at the same level as the papers and the ledger and the catalog cards. They worked. She didn't examine it too closely, this specific, quiet thing of 2 people working at the same table in the late hours of a complicated evening without needing to explain themselves to each other. She just let it be what it was. An hour passed, maybe more. Then Nathaniel said, without looking up from the ledger he'd been helping her cross-reference, My father was a hard man. Clara stilled her pen. She said nothing. She had learned that sometimes the right response to someone beginning to tell you something true is simply to not interrupt. Not cruel, he said hard. There's a difference. He believed that softness was the thing that unmade men. That caring too openly was a weakness that other people would use. He turned a page. He ran the estate like a campaign, like a thing to be won. He paused. I grew up thinking that was what a man was supposed to do. And Theodore? Clara said quietly. Theodore was the only person in my childhood who looked at me like a person instead of a Crawford. He said it simply, with the particular flatness of someone stating a fact they've sat with long enough that the grief around it has become something more like plain truth. He used to take me to the library when I was small. He'd pull down a book and say, "What does this make you think?" Not what does it say. What does it make you think? He paused. I haven't done that in 20 years. Just thought. Without the thought being in service of something. Clara looked at him across the table. What does it make you think, she said. Right now. This. She gestured at the room. At the ledger, the letter. The catalog cards. The 2 of them in the loaf of firelight with the accumulated patience of 30 years of books around them. Nathaniel looked at her. He held her gaze for a long, still moment. That I have been, he said slowly, very lonely for a very long time. And that I had gotten so used to it that I stopped noticing. He paused. And that I noticed now. Clara felt the words land somewhere specific and quiet inside her. She did not look away. I know something about that, she said. I know you do, he said. They sat with that for a moment. Two people who had arrived at an honest thing and were choosing carefully not to rush past it. Then Clara picked up her pen. Margaret's entry, she said. How do you want it to read? He thought for a moment. Margaret Crawford, he said. 1820 to 1891. Taught herself French, Italian, and Latin in this library between 1841 and 1848. Left the Crawford estate at 28. Became a language teacher in Philadelphia. Described by her family as luminous, he paused. Her books remain here. Clara wrote it. She wrote it in the careful, precise hand she used for things that mattered. She wrote it in the catalog ledger that would sit in this library for another 30 years or more. She wrote it so that the next person who looked, whoever they were, whatever they were looking for, would find Margaret Crawford and know her name and know what she had done with her one life in a room that had not expected her to do anything at all. She finished. She set the pen down. She looked at what she'd written. Good, Nathaniel said quietly. Yes, 3 days later. Montgomery withdrew the complaint. No statement, no public explanation. The county office received the paperwork on a Monday morning, and Pennock sent word to the estate by noon. Clara read Pennock's note at the library table and set it down and sat with it for a moment. She had expected to feel more than she felt. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction, or the specific vindication of a wrong being officially undone. What she felt was tired, not the desperate tired of those first weeks after the dismissal. A different tired. The tired of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been permitted to set it down, and whose arms are still in the shape of the carrying. She folded the note. She went back to work. Theodore came to the library that afternoon. He rarely came to the estate. This was the second time. And the first had been at her invitation to see the Northeast Corner collection she'd been telling him about on Thursday mornings. He came in slowly, with his cane, and found her on the ladder in the southwest corner, working through what appeared to be 30 years of navigation and surveying materials that had been shelved with no apparent logic. Montgomery withdrew, he said, from below her. I know, she said. She didn't come down. Pennock sent word. How do you feel? She handed him a book without looking, an Eganaldation from 1861, which he took automatically, which was a thing that had happened between them organically. The shorthand of people who have spent enough time together to move through tasks without narrating them. Tired, she said. That's honest. I try to be. I know you do. He looked at the almanac in his hands. Clara, I need to tell you something. She came down the ladder. Something in his voice had the quality of information that has been held for a while and has become heavier with the holding. She stood at the bottom of the ladder and looked at him. He was looking at the almanac with the expression of a man organizing his thoughts into the order he wants to deliver them. When I left the Crawford estate 11 years ago, he said. After Eleanor died, I told Nathaniel I was going to travel. To see things. To take time. He paused. What I didn't tell him was that I had been diagnosed with a condition of the heart. The doctor gave me between 2 and 5 years. That was 11 years ago. Clara felt the floor shift slightly beneath her. Theodore, she said. I've been managing it, he said. Carefully. The doctor in Harlow Creek has been helpful. The condition has been apparently less aggressive than originally projected. He finally looked up at her. But I wanted you to know, because you matter to me in a way that makes it dishonest not to tell you. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the Thursday mornings, the tea, the arguments about history, the way he had appeared at her door with an apology he hadn't owed her, the way he had threatened Charles Montgomery with great courtesy on her behalf, the way he looked at her across rooms with the expression of a man who has found the thing he came looking for. Why didn't you tell me before, she said. Because at first you didn't know who I was, he said. And then when you did, I was afraid it would change how you looked at me. That you'd treat me like something fragile. He paused. You have never once treated me like something fragile. That has been, his voice shifted slightly, briefly. That has been more valuable to me than I can adequately express. Clara breathed. She was aware of the precise and specific nature of what she felt, not grief. Not yet, not while he was standing in front of her, looking entirely himself, but the particular foreknowledge of grief, the awareness of the shape of a loss before it arrives, which is its own kind of love. Does Nathaniel know? She asked. I told him this morning. How did he take it? The way Nathaniel takes things, Theodore said. Quietly. And then he went for a long ride, which is what he does when he's feeling something he hasn't yet decided what to do with. Clara nodded slowly. I am not asking for anything to change, Theodore said. I am not asking for sadness, or for special treatment, or for any of the things people usually offer when they receive this kind of information. I am only asking stopped. He looked at her steadily. I am asking that you know. Because you deserve to know the people who are in your life. Fully. Not just the parts that are convenient. Clara looked at this man, 72 years old, in the Crawford Library, with a navigation almanac in his hand, and a heart that had been defying a doctor's estimate for 11 years, and she thought about what it meant to be known. Fully. Not just the convenient parts. She stepped forward and put her hand over his, over the old, steady, work-marked hands that held the almanac, and she said, Then I know. He looked down at her hand. He covered it with his other hand. Thank you, he said, very quietly. Don't thank me, she said. I learned that from someone. He made a small sound. Almost a laugh. The deep, private smile she knew. They stood like that for a moment in the library. In the afternoon light, surrounded by the record of everything a family had thought was worth keeping, and she thought, this is also worth keeping. This exact moment, this man. This particular form of love that doesn't have a simple name because it is too many things at once. She would keep it. She had learned how. Nathaniel came back from his ride at dusk. She was still in the library. She was always still in the library. She had stopped pretending this surprised anyone when she heard the horse in the yard and then the particular rhythm of his footsteps coming through the house. She had learned his footsteps. She had stopped examining that. He came in. He looked at her. He told you, he said. Yes, he came and sat down, not the fireplace chair. The working chair. He put his elbows on the table and pressed both hands against his face for a moment, just a moment. Just long enough, and then lowered them. 11 years, he said. He said the doctor was wrong, Clara said. He's been wrong before. He'll be wrong again. He's stubborn enough to outlive all of us. He paused. I know that. I know all of that. He looked at his hands. It doesn't make it, Clara said. It doesn't. They sat with that. The particular weight of loving someone whose time is uncertain, which was every person. But usually you had the mercy of not knowing it. He came here for you, Nathaniel said. You understand that. He came to see what the world did with nobody, she said. I was the specific nobody he found. No, Nathaniel shook his head. He came because he knew he had a limited time, and he wanted to spend some of it watching someone choose to be honest when it cost them something. He needed to see it, to know it still existed. He looked at her. You gave him that. 6 weeks of it. Every Thursday. You gave him the thing he came to find. Clara felt the truth of this land in her quietly. Like something coming to rest after a long time in motion. She had not known, at the auction, that she was giving anyone anything. She had not known, on the library step, saying her quiet all right to the morning air, that she was being anyone's answer to a question. She had simply been herself. That was the thing. The entire thing. She thought about what Theodore had said, in the sitting room, that is the rarest thing I know. Clara, and she thought, she was beginning to understand it in a way she hadn't before. Not because she'd heard it. Because she'd felt the weight of what it had cost, and the weight of what it had given. and those two weights together made a shape she recognized. "What are you thinking?" Nathaniel said. She looked at him across the table. At this man who had ridden 12 miles on a Thursday morning to offer a job to a woman he'd never met because his uncle asked him to open his eyes. Who had sat in this chair every day for 2 weeks and read books for pleasure for the first time in years. Who had walked into a sitting room with her arm on his, without making her into a cause or a charity or a story, and stood beside her. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that I came to this county with $31 and a book of poetry and 2 months of unpaid rent. And that the only decision I made that mattered was a decision about what kind of person I was going to be when no one was giving me any reason to be that kind of person." He looked at her. "That's the only decision any of us ever makes," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "I'm just starting to understand what it costs. And what it builds," he said. She held his eyes. "Yes," she said. "And what it builds." Something moved in the space between them, something that had been building slowly, without either of them rushing it, the way the best things build. The way a library builds, one careful acquisition at a time. He reached across the table. He set his hand over hers. She did not pull away. She looked at his hand over hers, this man's hand, which had signed contracts and held reins and turned pages in this room, and now covered her hand on the table where Margaret Crawford's letter lay, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not safe. She had learned to be careful about that word. Safe was the wrong shape for what she was feeling. She felt known. That was the thing, the full thing. She turned her hand over beneath his slowly, and let their fingers close together, and looked at him across the table in the low firelight, and did not say anything. She didn't need to. Neither did he. 3 weeks later, Helen Forsythe came to the library. She came with her daughter, a girl of 12, dark-haired and serious in the way that 12-year-olds are serious when they are the kind of 12-year-old who will become a very specific type of woman. And she said to Clara, with the directness that Clara had come to appreciate as the most reliable thing about her, "My daughter wants to learn to read Latin. I don't know anyone who teaches it." "I was told you read it." Clara looked at the girl. The girl looked back at her with the expression of someone who is expecting to be told it is impractical or unsuitable or not something they have arranged for. "I do," Clara said. "Would you be willing?" "Yes," Clara said. She looked at the girl. "What's your name?" "Eleanor," the girl said, watching her carefully, still waiting for the impractical. Clara looked at the shelves, at the section she had labeled, in careful pencil on a small card, languages, self-taught, at the Italian primer with Margaret Crawford's annotations, at the Latin grammar she had pulled from the northwest corner and catalogued beside it. "Eleanor," she said, "come here, I want to show you something." The girl came. Clara pulled the Latin grammar from the shelf and opened it and set it on the reading table. "A woman named Margaret taught herself language in this room," she said. 50 years ago. She was afraid and she did it anyway, and she became someone remarkable." She looked at the girl. "You can have the same books she used. We'll start on Monday." Eleanor looked at the book. At the shelf. "Was she a Crawford?" she said. "She was," Clara said. "But she was herself first." The girl looked at her for a long moment with those serious 12-year-old eyes that were already reading the room correctly. "All right," she said. Clara thought, yes, she thought. All right, she thought, this is what it builds. Helen Forsythe watched from the doorway and said nothing, which was its own kind of eloquence. Sighed, somewhere on the estate. Theodore was walking slowly, with his cane, in the late October air, taking his time with the afternoon. Which was what he did now, deliberately and without apology. He had 11 years of extra time that a doctor hadn't given him, and he intended to use each day of it exactly as he chose. And Nathaniel Crawford was somewhere in this house, which had been, for 20 years, only a building, and was becoming, slowly and imperfectly and without ceremony, something closer to a home. Clara set her hand flat on the open page of the Latin grammar. She thought about $31. She thought about a dark blue dress with a mended collar and a book of poetry in a coat pocket and a woman standing on library steps, saying all right to a morning that had not yet decided what it would offer. She thought, I did not know, then, what I was walking toward. She thought I only knew what I was. That had been enough. It had in the end been everything. Eleanor Forsythe came back on Monday. She came back on Tuesday and every day after that. Clara had not expected this. She had expected the enthusiasm of a 12-year-old to last perhaps 2 weeks before the reality of Latin declensions and the weight of a dead language settled in and made other things seem more appealing. She had been prepared for it. She had taught enough children in enough contexts to know that beginning is easy and continuing is the whole of the work. Eleanor continued. She came in the mornings before her other lessons. She sat at the reading table with the Latin grammar, and Margaret Crawford's Italian primer beside it. She'd taken to the Italian as well. Without being invited, simply because it was there, and she was the kind of person who could not see an open door without walking through it. She asked precise questions. She accepted correction without embarrassment. She had the particular quality of a person who wants to actually learn a thing rather than perform the learning of it. Clara recognized that quality. She had spent her whole life being defined by it. 6 weeks in, Eleanor arrived on a Tuesday morning. Sat down, opened the grammar, and said without preamble, Miss Bennet, did Margaret Crawford know anyone would find her letter? Clara looked at her across the table. I don't think so, she said. I think she put it there because she needed to put it somewhere. Eleanor considered this. That's sad. It is, said, and it isn't. Because someone did find it, which means she was right to put it there. Even if she couldn't have known it. Eleanor looked at the primer. I want to write something in mine, she said. So whoever finds it next knows I was here. Clara felt something move through her chest. Quiet and full, she said. Eleanor picked up her pen and wrote. In the front cover of the Italian primer, in careful 12-year-old script. Eleanor Forsythe, 1887. I learned this here. I was not afraid. She set the pen down and looked at what she'd written. I was a little afraid, she admitted. That's all right, Clara said. So was Margaret. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. She opened the grammar and got to work. Clara sat across from her and did the same. It was Marta Elkins who told her about Montgomery. It was always Marta who told her things. Clara had come to accept this as a law of the universe. The same way she'd accepted that Mrs. Greer would feed her when she was struggling, and that Theodore would arrive precisely when she needed someone to say the true thing. Marta came to the estate on a Wednesday in person, which meant the information was significant enough that she didn't trust the post and found Clara in the library and sat down off from her with the expression of a woman who has organized her news into the correct order and is prepared to deliver it efficiently. Montgomery's leaving Harlow Creek, she said. Clara set down her pen. Leaving, she said. Selling the Main Street properties. The two in the next county as well. Word is he's relocating to St. Louis. Marta folded her hands on the table. Apparently the railway contract he was counting on the extension through the county did not renew. Clara was quiet for a moment. Nathaniel's railway contract, she said. The same. She looked at the table. She thought about what Nathaniel had said, I am decided, and the specific, quiet authority in those two words. She thought about the way he had walked into that sitting room and said withdraw the complaint with the same tone he used to discuss ledgers and book catalogs. No performance, just clarity. He didn't tell me, she said. Did you need to know? Marta said, with the particular gentleness of a woman who has known Clara long enough to ask the question that actually matters. Clara thought about it honestly. No, she said. I didn't need to know. But I want to understand it. Understanding it, Marta said, means understanding that the man chose something over a profitable contract. That's not nothing, Clara. Marta stood. She had delivered her news. She was satisfied. She patted the table once the way Mrs. Greer patted shoulders, as a full expression of something that didn't need words, and said, "Your father would have liked to see this." Clara looked up. "Which part?" she said. Oliva said, "Every bit." She left. Clara sat alone in the library for a while after that. She sat with the knowledge of what Nathaniel had done, quietly. Without telling her, without making it into something she would owe him. A business decision made on a principle. A cost absorbed without ceremony. She thought, that is the man he is becoming. Or returning to. I am still learning the difference. She went to find him. He was in his study. He was always in his study or in the library. And she had stopped knocking weeks ago because he had told her plainly, without making a thing of it, that she did not need to announce herself in a house where she worked. She came in. She looked at him. He looked up from his papers. "Montgomery is leaving," she said. He held her eyes. "Yes, the railway contract." "You didn't tell him," he said. "I didn't." He set down his pen. "It was a business decision. I make them. I don't generally explain them. You don't generally make them based on what happens to a dismissed librarian either," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I made it based on what kind of man Charles Montgomery is, and whether I wanted his name attached to Crawford business for the next 20 years. He paused. "The fact that his treatment of you illustrated his character most clearly is accurate. But it was his character I was declining, not an act of vengeance on your behalf." Clara looked at him. "You understand the difference matters to me," she said. "I do," he said. "That's why I'm explaining it," she breathed. She felt the truth of it settle. The distinction was real. He had not done it for her, he had done it because of the kind of man he was deciding to be. That she had been the catalyst was something different from being the reason. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. She turned to go. "Clara, I did also do it," he said. "Because of what his treatment of you illustrated. Both things are true simultaneously. I am not certain why I tried to make it only one." She turned back. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to know as the one he wore when he had just told her something more honest than he had planned to. "Because you're precise," she said. "I'm learning," he said. "That precision has limits." She looked at him. Something between them had been building for weeks with the particular patience of things that are built correctly, not rushed. Not performed, not pressured into a shape before it was ready. She was aware of it the way you are aware of weather changing. Not dramatically, just a shift in the quality of the air. "Nathaniel," she said, "what is this?" He didn't pretend not to understand. He stood up from his desk slowly. He came around to the front of it and he stood there, looking at her, without filling the space between them with anything unnecessary. "I think," he said, "it is the most honest thing I have been part of in a very long time." "That's not an answer," she said. "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He looked at her directly. "I don't want to offer you something I haven't fully examined. You deserve more than a feeling I haven't tested yet. And have you tested it every day for 6 weeks?" he said. "Every time you disagreed with me, every time you told me something hard about my family, and put it on my desk without softening it. Every time you counted to 8 in a room where something difficult had just happened and came back steadier than before." He paused. "Every time you treated Theodore like a person, every time you treated me like one." Clara looked at him. "I am a librarian," she said, "from a small town, with a mended collar and $31 that are mostly gone." "And you are a Crawford." "I am," he said, "and you are the person Theodore came 60 miles to find evidence of. And the person who taught a 12-year-old girl that being afraid does not mean you stop." He looked at her. "And the person who put her hand over my uncle's hands in this library and said, 'Then I know,' and meant it completely." He paused. "I am not asking you to be anything other than precisely what you are. I am telling you that what you are is the thing I want to be beside." Clara felt those words in the specific, quiet way she felt true things, not with force, but with weight. The weight of something that had been coming from a long way off and had finally arrived. "Beside," she said, "not in front of," he said, "not behind." You told me once there was a difference. Theodore told you, she said. Theodore told me, he agreed. You showed me, she breathed. She thought about $31 and a book of poetry and a boarding house room and the library steps and the counted breath and the all right said over and over to mornings that had not yet decided what they would offer. She thought about what all of that had been preparation for. She thought, maybe this, maybe exactly this, all right, she said. He looked at her. He said, all right, she said. Beside, something in his face changed, not dramatically, not with performance, quietly, the way a room changes when someone you were waiting for finally walks in. He reached out. She took his hand. Theodore was on the east porch when she found him. He was sitting in the afternoon light with his cane across his knees and his eyes closed. His face turned toward the warmth, with the particular intention of a man who has decided to pay attention to small things. He heard her coming and opened his eyes and looked at her face, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, well, she said. She sat down beside him. You talked to Nathaniel. I did. He looked at her expression. At whatever it was her face was doing, without her having told it to. Good, he said simply. She looked out at the estate, at the land that stretched to the tree line, at the house behind them that was full of history and imperfect order, and one 12-year-old girl learning Latin on Monday mornings. She looked at all of it and thought about the county auction and the brown coat and the walking cane, and the moment she had stepped forward into a silence that everyone else had decided to stay inside. You planned this, she said. I planned nothing, Theodore said. With perfect sincerity. I came to see what the world did with a nobody. What happened after that was not my arrangement. But you hoped, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I hoped, he said, that my nephew would remember how to see people. I hoped that whatever I found out here would give him a reason to remember. He paused. I did not arrange for that person to be you. I did not arrange for you to be precisely what he needed to see. At precisely the moment he needed to see it, he looked at her. Some things arrange themselves. You only have to be paying attention. Clara looked at him, this old man with his stubborn heart and his 11 extra years and his brown coat that was hanging in a wardrobe now, replaced by a suit he wore with the ease of someone returning to themselves after a long absence. Are you happy, she said. He considered this with genuine seriousness. Yes, he said, I believe I am. He paused. I did not expect to be. At my age and my condition, having spent 11 years moving from place to place, I had made my peace with a smaller kind of contentment. The daily kind. Sufficient and real, but not. He stopped. Not this. What is this, she said. He looked at the afternoon light. This, he said, is having a place to be, people to be it with. The particular fullness of a life that has arrived somewhere. Even late, even imperfectly, he looked at her. You gave me this. Clara. Not by trying to, just by being what you are. He paused. Don't ever stop being what you are. She looked at him. She felt in that moment the full weight of the past 3 months, from the auction to the library steps, to the Thursday mornings, to the dinner, to the sitting room, to Margaret's letter, to Nathaniel's hand covering hers on a reading table in the low firelight, and she felt it not as a burden, but as the opposite of a burden. As ballast, as the specific accumulated weight of a life that was becoming real. She reached over and put her hand on his. He covered it with his other hand. Same gesture, same warmth. I know, she said. I know. The library opened to the county on the 1st of December. It was Clara's idea. She had come to Nathaniel with it 6 weeks earlier calmly. Precisely, with a full proposal that she set on his desk without preamble, and she had said, the children of this county don't have access to books. Not the working families, not the tenant farmers. This library has been private for 30 years, and it has done nothing for anyone except store what the Crawfords already had. Let me change that. He had read the proposal. He had looked at her. Monday through Friday, he said. 2 hours in the afternoon. 3, she said. 2.5, he said. We'll assess after a month. 3, she said. Children can't get here and back in 2.5 hours on foot. He looked at her. 3, he said. She had nodded and taken back the proposal and gone to work. The first day, 11 children came. Clara stood at the library door and watched them file in a range of ages. Some with clean shoes and some without, all with the particular expression of people who have been told there is something worth seeing inside and are not yet certain whether to believe it. She let them in. She showed them the shelves. She told them about Margaret. She told them about a woman who had stood in this room 50 years ago and taught herself 3 languages in secret and gone on to become remarkable. She told them the books were theirs to use. She told them the only rule was that they return what they took. A boy of about 9 put his hand up. "What if we can't read?" he said. He said it with the bravery of someone who has decided the embarrassment of asking is smaller than the embarrassment of not knowing. "Then that's what we start with," Clara said. He nodded. Satisfied. She thought, yes, she thought this is what it builds. On the second week, Eleanor Forsythe came on a Monday morning and found 3 children already at the reading table, and Clara working with the youngest on his letters. Eleanor sat down beside the boy without being asked and helped without being instructed. Because she was 12 years old and understood, without needing it explained, that knowing something creates an obligation to pass it on. Clara watched her and thought of Margaret. She thought of Theodore in his chair on the east porch, with the afternoon light on his face and 11 extra years he intended to use. She thought of Nathaniel, who had come into the library that morning before the children arrived and stood in the doorway and looked at the room at the open shelves, the reading table, the chairs arranged for small bodies, and said nothing for a long time. She had let him look. "My grandfather built this room," he said finally. "So the family could read." "Yes," she said. And now," she said. "It is for everyone the family shares this county with." She looked at him. "That is not a diminishment. That is what the room was always supposed to become." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it is." He had stayed for the first hour. He had sat in the fireplace chair not reading, just present while Clara taught, and the children learned, and Eleanor helped the youngest boy sound out the letters of his own name. When the boy finally read his own name aloud slowly, with complete concentration, one sound at a time, the room went quiet for just a moment. Then Eleanor said, "Good. Now the next word." And the boy looked at the page and kept going. Nathaniel had watched this happen from his chair. Clara had not looked at him. She didn't need to. She knew his face by now, its specific grammar, its contained and legible changes, and she knew, without looking, what it was doing. He was remembering how to be moved by something. He was doing it without apologizing. That was enough. That was in fact everything. Theodore died on a Thursday. Not that winter. Not the next. He lived 2 more years of afternoon light and east porches and Thursday mornings with Clara, who still made tea and still argued about history and still treated him exactly the same way she always had. Regardless, he died on a Thursday in the spring, which seemed right. He had always been a Thursday person. He went quietly. In the room above the dry goods on Clement Street, he had kept the room. All that time, because he said he liked the view, and because he was the kind of man who kept things that mattered with Nathaniel on one side and Clara on the other, and the writing desk on the table by the window, where it had always been. He had asked them both to be there. They were. He did not say anything grand at the end. He said, "The tea is better at the estate." And then he looked at Clara and smiled, the small, deep smile, the one that came from far inside him, and he closed his eyes. Clara held his hand. She held it for a long time after. She did not count to 8. She did not say all right to the room. She simply held on, because some things don't require management. Some things only require presence. She had learned that from him. She was still learning things from him. She thought she always would. A year after Theodore died, Clara Bennett and Nathaniel Crawford were married in the county church in Harlow Creek. On a Saturday in October, with Marta Elkins weeping openly in the second row, and Helen Forsyth sitting beside her with the expression of a woman who predicted this 18 months ago and is graciously thinks not saying so. Eleanor Forsyth, now 14, read a passage from a book she had chosen herself. It was in Latin. She translated it herself without prompting. For the people in the room who didn't know the language. After the service, Clara stood on the church steps in the October light, not the library steps. Not the boarding house steps, not any of the steps she had stood on, in dark blue dresses, saying quiet, all rights to mornings, that hadn't yet decided what they would offer, and she looked at the town. Harlow Creek, her father's town, her town, still small. Still imperfect. Still full of people making their daily decisions about whether to look away. But the library was open 3 afternoons a week, and a 9-year-old boy could read his own name, and Eleanor Forsyth knew Latin and Italian and was not afraid. And on the estate 12 miles east, in a room that had held 30 years of accumulated neglect, there was a catalog entry that read, Margaret Crawford, 1820 to 1891, taught herself French, Italian, and Latin in this library. Left at 28, became luminous. Her books remain here. And on the shelf beside the Italian primer, in small 12-year-old script inside the front cover. I was not afraid. Nathaniel came and stood beside her. Not in front, not behind. She looked at him. He looked at her. She thought about $31 and a mended collar and a book of poetry and the single decision that had mattered, the decision about what kind of person she was going to be when no one was giving her any reason to be that kind of person. She thought it was enough. She thought it was, in the end. Everything. She took his hand. She did not look back. She had never needed to. She had always known exactly where she was going, and